Let's proceed then. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bill Edgar. I'm the president of the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. And on behalf of the board this morning, I would like to thank you for logging in today's meeting utilizing the WebEx platform. This teleconference meeting constitutes the board's regular public business meeting for the month of July 2020. We very much appreciate your taking the time to log in this morning and join us for this meeting. Now that we've all been trained and experienced in this virtual meeting protocol, so we're not going to spend a lot of time going over them again. However, Ryan, if you have any technical issues that you want to review that would help the audience access the meeting, I'll make room for you during the introduction if you have some comments you want to make, or Leslie, either one. First of all, this morning, I would like to recognize our newest board member, Mary Jane Griego, who was just appointed to fill the existing vacant position of the board. And we're very pleased to have her with us on the board this morning. She's been able to complete all of the paperwork and take her oath of office. Therefore, today she will take her place as a full voting member of the board today for this regular board business meeting. As I said before, I've known Mary Jane for many years, and we've worked together on many issues, including flood risk reduction for the Plymouth Lakes area of Yuba County, and the startup and successful efforts of the Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency, which was really patterned after the work that she and her colleagues did with Three Rivers Improvement Authority in Yuba County. Welcome aboard, Mary Jane. It's good to have you on the board this morning. You're certainly welcome to say anything if you want to. You don't have to, but you're certainly welcome to at this time if you want to make some comments.
Thank you very much, President Edgar. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited about this new role that I'm entering in with, and I appreciate the warm welcome that I've gotten from the board members and from the staff. And so I'm anxious to get started. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. We appreciate that. Now, regarding the meeting process itself, I think that the way we've run these meetings before has generally been good, and therefore I would like to proceed today as we have before. That is, our board clerk, Ryan Jones, will be moderating these proceedings from a technical point of view and will operate the slides for the day's presenters. He, as well as Leslie, Michael, and the other staff will field comments and questions addressed to the presenters and the board, either from text or emails that they receive from the public or stakeholders. And you can go through, or you can go through the chat function on the platform if you prefer and feel more comfortable with that. Second, following each presentation, I'm going to ask questions or comments from the board members first. And after the board is finished, we will then unmute the public speakers, and Leslie and the staff will try to identify those who have requested to speak. I will then call on those speakers on the first come, first served basis. After we've completed the public testimony, the board will, I'll bring the matter back to the board for more comments, questions, and final action. You should be aware that this meeting is being recorded and will be housed in our website, just as streaming video from our other meetings have been all along. We will probably be taking a break about every hour or so for 15 minutes to give our reporter as well as the staff a break and to catch up. Our break for lunch, if we need a break around that time, would be around noon, and that would be for probably 30 minutes. Ryan will place a sign to appear on the screen at the break and lunchtime, stating that the board is on a short break and estimating the time that we'll return for the meeting. Finally, I know we're all tired and a little grumpy, and pretty much done with this virus. But since it's not done with us, we're going to have to persevere in order to conduct our business efficiently and effectively as we can. So I would urge everyone just to take a breath, relax, and try to be calm and courteous and understanding of what we're trying to do during this very difficult time. So at this time, Ryan, would you like to make any just general comments to the public, the board, and the stakeholders regarding technical issues that they might listen to in order to make the meeting more efficient and effective?
Yes, thank you, President Edgar. First off, I want to apologize for the early morning issues with the meeting. I had the meeting locked for a pre-meeting, and I didn't unlock it for the call, so that's why you experienced the issues with your phone calls. So for our public comment process, and this is applying not to the general public comment, but if you would like to comment on a specific item on the agenda, the best way to do so would be to email me, and my email is on the July agenda. And all I need from you, I don't need an elaborate email, I just need you to include your name, who you're representing, and the specific item number you would like to speak on, just like the speaker comment card we'd use for an in-person meeting. And other than that, there's just the mute, unmute function. We ask that you mute yourselves until you've been called upon. So thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Those are very helpful. I appreciate that. Members, I believe we have a full agenda today, including an interesting public hearing. However, I am anticipating getting through the agenda, including the hearing this morning, and ending the meeting around 1 or so. We do not have a closed session today for those who were wondering about that. Regarding the items themselves, Vice President Dolan, under item 3, will be presenting the minutes for the April 24th and May 22nd regular board meetings for your approval today. They were included in the agenda packet. We have our usual consent calendar under item 5 with 4 items on the agenda this morning. I've been told that all 4 items are in order and are ready for approval. Next, under item 7A, Jeremy Erich, the Chief of the Division of Flood Management, has submitted his written monthly report from the Department of Water Resources for the board's review and information. The department stands ready to answer any questions from the board. Under item 8A on the agenda, we have a public hearing, which should be interesting. At the beginning of the hearing, I will be proposing a process for your consideration so we can get through this matter without anybody getting hurt. Apparently, there is an issue of proper noticing, which our legal counsel has reviewed and completed the research and is prepared to address that issue if that issue arises. Then under the category of board items, item number 9, we have 2 very important briefings, 1 informational item and 1 action item. Although a little confusing, item 9B is slated to be removed from the agenda itself. 9A is an informational item regarding the board's budget update. That will be given by Catherine Baines. Again, item 9B is to be removed from the agenda. It looks a little confusing on the agenda itself, but 9B is deleted from the agenda this month. Item 9C is the approval of the Sacramento Riverbank Protection Project expansion or change project, as the Corps indicates, and the certification of the environmental documents. This is a project that the Corps and the department have been working on for some time, and we're asked to approve that today. And finally, we have our usual executive officers report, including the informational staff reports for the board's review. We also have the normal board comments, committee updates, and calendar for everyone's edification. So this should be an interesting meeting. So let's get on with it. As you're aware, the welcome, introduction, and announcements item number 1 this morning. There are 3 items, and we want to cover under this item. First, there's the opening remarks, and we just completed those. Next, under item 1, we've had introductions and announcements, and we, of course, welcomed Mary Jane to the board as a full voting member for today's meeting. Leslie, I believe you have one other introduction that you'd like to make at this time.
I do. Thank you, Mr. President. And I would just note also that joining us again today is one of our ex officio members, Keith Cialino, representing the Assembly Parks and Water and Wildlife Committee. Ryan, do you have the photo of our new employee? We did manage to hire a new employee post-COVID.
One moment, please.
Post-COVID, we do have a new employee that's joining us, Zubair Dosu. He's the newest member of our enforcement section. He's new to state service and comes to us after working in the private sector for several years, most recently with CPA Engineering and Surveying, where he designed and prepared engineering plans for residential and commercial development. He holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Cal State Sacramento, and he has his EIT certificate and successfully passed the 8-hour national exam for his PE. He's still tackling the seismic and surveying portions, which I understand are very difficult. There's a picture of Zubair, and he is on the line with us today. This will be his first board meeting that he's attending. So we want to welcome him to the board. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Leslie. Appreciate it. Members, we're on item 2 now, the roll call for the board. Ryan, would you please call the roll, given whether we have a quorum to conduct our business, please?
Board Member Griego.
Here.
Board Member Johnson.
Here.
Board Member Ramirez.
Here.
Board Member Valines.
Here.
Board Member Countryman.
Present.
Vice President Dolan.
I'm here.
President Edgar.
I'm here. Thank you, Ryan. We have a full board this morning for the first time in a long time, thanks to Mary Ann. Okay, we're on item 3, and this is our minutes. Vice President Dolan, under item 3, is presenting the minutes for April 24th and 22nd regular board meetings to the board for your approval. And Jane, I'll turn the meeting over to you for any comments and a motion, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just checking, since I have rural issues with the computer. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Took a while. Thank you, Ryan, for your help. The minutes that you were sent on time this time were April 24th and May 22nd, 2020. For our new members and our continuing members, I think you remember this, the minute approval at the board is typically 2 months after the formal meeting. I missed the deadline of sending them with last month so that you would have adequate time to read them, but met at this time. So I want you to know, I think that these minutes are in order for approval, and they've also been reviewed by appropriate staff. I'm going to count 2, 3 to see if any of you have any corrections or comments before I make the motion. Well, I hear none, Mr. President. Thank you all. I will move approval of the April 24th and the May 22nd, 2020 board meeting minutes.
Members, do we have a second, please?
Second.
I think that was Ramirez first. Okay.
I got 2. I don't know who was first.
It was Brian.
Oh, Brian.
wins.
Okay. Brian wins. All right. Moved by Dolan, second by Johnson, that the minutes for both April 24th and May 22nd regular board meetings be approved. All in favor?
Aye. Aye. Aye.
After
Aye.
unanimous vote by the board, no opposition. Okay, let's move on to item 4. Leslie, this is your item to review any items that I've missed on my review of the meeting this morning?
Thank you, Mr. President. And I don't have anything to add other than to just make clear that the item that was requested after the agenda was printed was item 9B, the San Joaquin River Basin. There was a little bit of confusion about the way that came up, but apologies for that. That is the item that has been requested to be removed.
Thank you, Leslie. Members, we're on item 5 at this point, which is our consent calendar. We have 4 items on the consent calendar this morning. We've been told that all 4 items are in order. Therefore, unless anyone decides to remove item 5A, 5B, 5C, or 5D from the consent calendar, or the public desires to remove one of these items, we'll be approving all 4 items in a single vote. And obviously, this will be a board action. Do members have any questions on items 5A, B, C, or D? Do you see any members, Leslie?
Nothing, Mr. President.
Okay. May I have any members of the public want to comment on the consent calendar? Ryan or Leslie, do you see anybody?
I've received no emails.
Okay, thank you.
Not.
Members, may I please have a motion and a second on the 4 items on the consent calendar, 5A, B, C, and D?
This is Jane. I would move that approval.
Okay, do we have a second?
This is Joe. Yes, I second.
Thank you, Joe. All in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Consent calendar is approved. We're on item 6, members. If anyone in the public has comments regarding items not on the agenda, please raise your hand or send an email to Ryan, and you will be recognized at this time. Do we have any emails, Ryan?
Yes, President Edgar, I received an email from Mr. Brian Manning, who is speaking on behalf of Palmer Hatch.
Okay, Mr. Manning, would you please state your name and who you're representing and what your issue is?
Yes, good morning, President Edgar and members of the board. My name is Brian Manning. I'm with the Desmond firm in Sacramento, and I'm representing Palmer Hatch regarding a notice of violation and enforcement case number 2018-723, Cherokee Canal, Butte County, regarding a pumping and drainage facility in Gridley. I want to start by saying I understand that since Mr. Hatch received a final determination on that notice of violation, the world's turned upside down. He received it on March 6th, and I'm here to speak about this because we're looking for a dialogue, and I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody. And the goal his goal has always been to address the matter proactively. And in doing so, I sent a letter to the board back on April 1st regarding this matter. Received a response from Mr. Dua on April 20th that board consideration of the issue is not the proper forum. I responded the next day that we can have a intellectual debate on whether or not the provisions allow for that, but that's not really in the best interest of either of our clients. So I said that instead, I welcome a call or conference where we can discuss this matter more generally and figure out a way to get it included as an agenda item at an upcoming board meeting. And I wrote that on April 21st. I didn't hear back, so I wrote again on June 16th asking for a discussion. I haven't heard back since, so I don't really know what to do, but I'm just bringing it to the board's attention because we do want to be proactive and hopefully receive a call from staff so we can discuss how to get this resolved amicably without a cease and desist order or unnecessary disputes. And that's the purpose of my general discussion today. And I thank you for your attention and anticipated action.
Okay, Mr. Manning, you're an attorney and you're well aware that we can't take any action or really even discuss this matter in detail since it's not agendized. However, I would refer your matter to the staff and ask our legal counsel to make sure that this matter is addressed in an expeditious way. If it can't be resolved, then we're going to proceed to a formal enforcement hearing, as you know, and would rather not do that, as you stated. We'd rather try to resolve this matter at the staff level. So, Jeet, can you tell us the proper procedure at this time?
Yes, President Egger, thank you. I will follow up with enforcement staff. It was my understanding that they have been in contact with Mr. Manning's client, but I will follow up, and I will follow up with Mr. Manning after I consult with enforcement staff and determine what the status of the matter is.
Okay, in the meantime, after your consultation with the staff, could you please inform the board as to what the status is? If this thing's going toward an enforcement hearing, that's one avenue. If it's going to be resolved at the staff level, that's another avenue. But I think at this point, would like to be informed as to what the disposition of this case is, please.
Absolutely.
Okay. Mr. Manning, your matter has been referred to the staff with a report out to the board either prior to or at the board's next monthly meeting.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You bet. Any other items not on the agenda?
I have received no emails.
Wow, Melinda's not talking today? Okay. Okay, members, we're on item 7, which is the Department of Water Resources monthly report. Under item 7A, Jeremy Erich, the chief of the Division of Flood Management, has submitted his written monthly report from the department for the board's review and information. Are there any questions from the board on this matter?
And Mr. President, just for the new members of the board, to let them know that we are working on a more inclusive and more information from the department on the programs they're running on behalf of the board, which will include the Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives. And Michael Wright and I are working with the executive level folks over at DWR to hopefully that will happen in the near future. So you'll be getting more appropriate briefings on a more regular basis. Hopefully for our new board members. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes.
Thank you, Leslie. I would appreciate that. I'm glad you're doing that.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan. It'll help the department plan their presentations over the year, and it will give us a chance to see what's coming up and add to or delete items as we see fit with more of a schedule for them. So I think that'll be better. Okay, members, we're on item 8, which is our public hearing. And in this matter, the board is being asked to approve permit number 19460 to restore and enhance approximately 2,128 acres of tidal marsh and riparian habitat within the Yolo bypass as part of the Lower Yolo restoration project. This project is located in the lower Yolo bypass near Cache Creek Slough, approximately 2 miles north of the Yolo and Solano County line in Yolo County. Now, before opening the hearing, I would like to explain the process that we're suggesting to the board for the board's use in conducting the hearing. First, members, as a suggestion, this is a hearing. It's not a evidentiary hearing or an enforcement hearing, but I think it's best that the board members, and I'm sure you're all aware of this, ask questions at any time following any person's presentations or comments. However, I would hope that prior to the time that the facts are being laid out completely and I bring this matter back to the board for discussion and decision, members would only ask clarifying and factual questions and not take a position on the proposal until we're ready for that part of the hearing. That's just a suggestion. Second, I will be enforcing the rule that members of the audience address the board only and tell us what they think of the project and the rationale behind their position, and not question or address the applicant, consultants, or other members of the public. And we've had that happen in some cases, and that's not proper. All presentations need to be focused on the presentations and to the board members, not other third parties. Third, will not be swearing in witnesses, I believe. We don't have to do that. Stand to be corrected on that if Jeet wants to swear in the witnesses, but I don't think that's necessary or customary at this time, since it's not an enforcement hearing. Justin Logan of our staff will be the first making the staff presentation and presenting an overview of the proposed project and summarizing the staff recommendations for the board. Westlands Water District, who is the applicant for the project, will present the proposed project to the board. I'm hoping that the applicant's presentation will not go beyond more than 20 minutes or so. I understand that DWR will also making a supporting presentation, which also should not go more than 20 minutes. We will then have the supporters of the project testify, and each person will be limited to 5 or 10 minutes. I'm not going to strictly enforce these time limits, but this will give you an idea of what we're looking at. Then we'll have the opponents of the project, and similarly, each person will be limited to 5 or so minutes time slot per person. And then finally, after that, we'll allow the proponents of the project a rebuttal period of 10 minutes. After all of that, I'll bring the matter back to the board, close the public hearing, and have the board's discussion and hopefully a decision at that point. My understanding is that there was a matter of noticing whether this project was properly noticed from a communication we received, and Mr. Dua has looked into this and done the research and is prepared to assist the board if that becomes an issue. So without objection, I'm going to ask Justin to proceed with the staff report.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning.
Good
Ryan,
morning.
do you have the slides? Okay. Good morning, everyone. President Egger, members of the board. My name is Justin Logan, board staff with the permitting section. Today, I will be presenting an overview of application number 19460, which is the Lower Yolo Restoration Project, agenda item 8A for today's hearing. Next slide. The applicant for this project is Westlands Water District. As President Edgar mentioned before, the location of the project is located within the lower Yolo bypass near Cache Flu, approximately 2 miles north of the Yolo and Solano County line. Next slide. Below is a regional map with Sacramento in the northern part. The Yolo bypass is shown in blue with the project marked with the number 19460. Next slide. Again, this is a zoomed in picture of the project site with the Yolo bypass shown in blue, levees shown in orange. Next slide. The red markings on this picture show the approximate project area, with the left showing the bypass and the right showing the project channel for the Army Corps of Engineers for the Yolo bypass. Next slide. The purpose of this project is to reintroduce tidal flows to the project site and to provide new food sources and refuge for various native species, including Delta smelt. A long-term management plan was submitted for the application. The project is expected to be turned over to the California Department of Water Resources once the project is constructed. DWR, as the current channel maintainer for most of the Yolo bypass, will be responsible for maintenance of the project when the permit is transferred to DWR. Funding for maintenance and perpetuity will come from DWR's long-term state water project water supply contracts. Next slide. For the project analysis, this project is to restore and enhance approximately 2,128 acres of tidal marsh and riparian habitat within the Yolo bypass as part of the Lower Yolo Restoration Project. The proposed work consists of 1, breaching existing primitive berms, 2, excavating swales and channels throughout the project site and dredging existing irrigation channels. A canal gate will be installed in the central irrigation ditch. 3, constructing a short perimeter berm around the project site. The berm will be under 3 feet high. Next slide. 4, using a nearby 109-acre parcel as a spoil site for excavated channel material. The spoil site will be graded to no more than 6 inches in depth across the parcel. The spoil site is located behind restricted height levees in the northwest corner of the project area. 5, removing small irrigation pipes and filling ditch culverts within the project area. Next slide. 6, removing and replacing an existing tide gate that is used for water diversion. A second tide gate will be removed and not replaced to allow for tidal flows through the site. 7, removing and replacing an existing pump station. This pump station provides water to existing farming within the bypass. Below is an overview map of the project site. As you can see in the top left corner, there's the spoil site. To the right of that is lands of Mound Farms. On the right-hand side, I have shown a line pointing to the canal gate location as well as the tide gate location. And the lower right-hand side is where the tide gate will be removed. And the lower left-hand side is where the pump station will be removed and replaced. Next slide. The hydraulic analysis requirements for applications typically are reviewed at the design flow or higher flows. This is focused on analyzing impacts with the adopted plan of flood control. Lower flows are not typically required for permit reviews. The Yolo bypass design flow of 490,000 cubic feet per second was used in this analysis. The analysis indicates that there will be 2 locations with localized water surface elevation rises between 0.05 feet and 0.1 feet. These are located away from the levees of the Yolo bypass. Velocity increases and decreases are shown to be less than 0.25 feet per second in the project area. Next slide. These 2 photos indicate where the water surface elevation changes and velocity changes will be. The left picture indicates the 2 specific areas of localized increases. Going off the colors of the light green, these are indicated as 0.05 to 0.1, as indicated earlier. The right, again, shows areas of velocity differences below 0.25 feet per second. Next slide. Following this is a brief overview of how staff reviews applications. During the review process, staff independently reviews parcel information to ensure all adjacent landowners to the project have been identified. Staff also notes SSJDD easements that are related to the project and if any land is owned in fee by SSJDD. This review does not include research on or review of easements of other entities or parties. Staff reviews compliance with Title 23 standards and CEQA. Next. Staff review continued. When an application is deemed complete, the application is then sent to the USACE Section 408 for review, and a letter is then sent notifying the applicant of the status. Letters are also sent at that time to adjacent landowners identified by the applicant and in the staff review. Application submittals require that the names and addresses of all landowners of the property on which the project is located and all landowners adjacent to the property on which the project is located are provided. The applicant provided a list with this application of adjacent landowners. Next slide. For protests, Mound Farms, which owns land adjacent to the project site, sent a letter to board staff on October 30th, 2019, objecting to the project after letters were sent to adjacent landowners on October 10th, 2019. Westland's Water District was provided a copy of the letter following Title 23 regulations. Mound Farms provided concerns that alternative easements and water conveyance features between the parties had not been fully agreed upon yet. Mound Farms' hydraulic concerns are that a water supply ditch and other easements for Mound Farms would be overrun with tidal and floodwaters under the project, and that it would have the potential to affect flooding on the lands of Mound Farms. Sweetwater Company was also sent a letter notifying them of the project. No response back was received from Sweetwater Company. Next slide. Westland's Water District submitted a letter on April 15, 2020 in response to that original Mound Farms concern letter. The hydraulic analysis reviewed by staff focused on impacts at the design flow for the Yola bypass and not tidal flow impacts. This is typical for review of project impacts to the adopted plan of flood control. At the design flow, the project site and adjacent land would be fully inundated at pre and post project conditions. The hydraulic impacts to the adopted plan of flood control at the design flow were determined to be insignificant based on the hydraulic analysis. Next slide. Pursuant to Title 23, Section 12 protests must be based solely upon flood control concerns or where the board is acting as lead agency under CEQA environmental concerns. Next slide. Staff recommendation. Before I get to this, I will note that the Army Corps of Engineers 408 letter has not been received yet. Army Corps of Engineers staff have indicated that the letter is routing for signature and is expected sometime next week, most likely. Staff recommendation. To consider conditional approval of permit number 19460 to adopt the CEQA findings below, to approve encroachment permit number 19460 in substantially the form provided in attachment A of the staff report, and direct the executive officer to take the necessary actions to execute the permit and file a notice of determination pursuant to CEQA with the state clearinghouse. Next slide. With that, that concludes my staff presentation of the project.
Okay, are there any questions from the board at this point?
I have a question.
Okay, Joe.
Did the CEQA analysis address the tidal flow situation?
I cannot specifically speak on CEQA as that isn't my area of expertise, but I believe the document submitted did address that.
Board Member Countryman, I believe we have Andrea Buckley on the line from our environmental staff. She might be able to respond to that question.
Okay.
Good morning. This is Sandra Buckley, Chief Environmental Services and Land Management. I believe it did. Do we have Jennifer Stewart on the line who can more accurately address that specific section?
Yes, good morning, President Edgar and members of the board. My name is Jennifer Stewart. I was pulling up my findings. I did incorporate the hydraulic analyses conclusions. Let's see, tidal flows were not specifically called out. Let me see. Darn it. Let's see. However, they are included in the EIR that was prepared for the project, member countrymen.
Joe, does that answer your question?
Well,
Okay.
no, because, well, I'm interested in what were the conclusions of the analysis? Was there a finding of impact or no impact?
Oh, I'm sorry. There was no impact. Less than significant impact.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the board? Okay, let's proceed then to the proponents of the project. Representatives from Westlands, please.
Good morning. My name is Jose Gutierrez. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Good morning,
Good to see
President. I believe we have a presentation also.
Yes, it's coming up now.
All right. Well, good morning, President Edgar and members of the board. My name is Jose Gutierrez. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Westlands Water District. With me today are Westlands General Counsel John Rubin, Andrea Matarazzo, Special Counsel for the district, Chuck Gardner of the Hallmark Group, he's the project manager, Chris Campbell of CBEC Eco Engineering, the district's engineering consultant, and Carl Jensen of ICF, our environmental consultant. Next slide, please. Westlands is excited to be nearing completion of a high priority project that will provide rearing, breeding, and refuge habitats for a broad range of aquatic and wetland dependent species, including delta smelt and salmonid species. This is a high priority project not only for the district, but also for the state. In 2000, Governor Gray Davis and Secretary of the Interior Bruce Babbitt approved the CalFed program to achieve 4 interrelated objectives: levee system integrity, ecosystem restoration, water supply reliability, and improved water quality. The CalFed program identified tidal habitat restoration in the lower Yolo bypass as a means of protecting at-risk species in the Delta. Westlands purchased the property in 2007 because it was ideally situated to restore tidal marshland habitat. Shortly thereafter, in 2008, the Delta Vision Strategic Plan was issued, and it too recommended restoring tidal habitats in the lower Yolo bypass as a means of protecting and enhancing the abundance of at-risk species in the Delta. As recently as May 2020, Governor Gavin Newsom's Eco Restore initiative specifically identified this project as part of its goal of restoring 30,000 acres of critical habitat in the Delta over the next 4 years. This project has been 13 years in the making, and with the board's consent today, we are prepared to commence construction this summer. At the outset, I'd like to thank the Central Valley Flood Protection Board staff, and in particular Justin Logan, for their diligence in developing the staff report. As stated in the staff report, the project received final EIR certification in 2013 by the state and federal contractors water agency, and since has been carried forward by Westlands. Next slide, please. Here is the list of the project team. Next slide, please. I'm going to discuss restoration next. This project is important to Westlands and has even greater significance to the state. It supports DWR's compliance with the Federal Endangered Species Act and is an integral part of the state's Eco-Restore program. In addition to providing habitat for threatened and endangered species such as Delta smelt and providing habitat for outmigrating salmonids, the project contributes to the governor's water resilience portfolio. The project comprises 1,682 acres of tidal marsh restoration, 35 acres of existing tidal marsh enhancement, 47 acres of enhanced existing riparian habitat, and 364 acres of transitional upland buffer habitat. Next slide, please. All these acres, so all of which result in the creation of approximately 1,733 Delta smelt habitat credits, 1,872 salmonid habitat credits. Additionally, the project provides benefit for a broad range of other aquatic and wetland-dependent species, plants, and animals. Directly adjacent to the restored property, on the remaining portion of Westlands property, Westlands is creating approximately 1,278 acres of Swainson's hawk habitat and an agricultural easement of similar size. With the board's approval today, Westlands is prepared to undertake one of, if not the largest, tidal restoration projects in the state's history. Next slide, please. Throughout the project's development, Westlands has worked to resolve concerns raised by other entities, including Yolo County and Solano County Water Agency. I am pleased to report that with one exception, Mound Farms, we have been successful in resolving issues raised by other parties. As it relates to Mound, both parties reported to Mr. Logan that significant progress had been made toward resolving Mound's issues, and it was our hope a resolution could be reached before today. Next slide. Unfortunately, we have not reached resolution with Mound, but the district will continue to work in good faith to reach a compromise. And as it relates to this hearing, Westlands agrees with your staff's report that the concerns raised by Mound are not germane to the board's consideration of this matter. Mound's concerns do not relate to tidal water level impacts, increased risks to levees, or the conveyance capability of the Yolo bypass. It is also worth noting that the entity that owns the water rights and facilities about which Mound expressed concern, the Sweetwater Company, has not protested Westland's request for an encroachment permit. But I'd like to take a moment and address briefly the issues raised by Mound. Next slide, please. Concerns raised by Mound's protest fall into three general categories: water rights, existing easements, and flooding. This project will not harm Mound's right to water. Sweetwater Company is the holder of the water rights licenses. Ownership in Sweetwater is based on the number of acres owned within the geographic bounds of Sweetwater. Each shareholder is entitled to an allocation based on their relative shares in Sweetwater. In short, the water allocation for Mound Farms is currently 3,239 acre-feet per year. After the project, Mound Farms allocation will remain unchanged at 3,239 acre-feet per year. Sweetwater easements that will be affected by the project are not needed, nor are they currently used to convey water to Mound. And again, as a reminder, Sweetwater has not raised here any concerns regarding the project with respect to its water rights or easements. If I can direct your attention to the figure in the presentation, the red line in the middle of the restoration project represents the Sweetwater easement that Westlands will request be abandoned. The southern point of that easement, as it's called out, is not a permitted point of diversion. The existing authorized point of diversion for Sweetwater to convey water to Westlands and Mound Farms is located at the tow drain, and that's also called out in your illustration, and that's the point at the farthest east perimeter of the property. So the existing authorized point of diversion for Sweetwater to convey water to Westlands and Mound Farms is located at the tow drain on the eastern boundary of Westlands property. Water from the tow drain flows west in a ditch, then north about 4,500 feet to Mound Farms pumping plants, as shown in the northern part of this figure. After the project is built, water will continue to flow from the tow drain to Mound Farms pumping plant, which is approximately 1 mile north of the easement. To clarify, the Sweetwater Company did consider filing a protest to the flood board, but the motion was not supported. Lastly, the project will not cause flood impacts to Mound Farms, either from daily tidal fluctuations or during high water events in the Yola bypass. As verified in the staff report, the project will not cause flood control impacts in the bypass. Chris Campbell from CBEC will address how the project design features were modified to address concerns raised by Mound Farms, and in fact, provide additional protections to Mound Farms from nuisance flooding from tidal fluctuations. But before I turn the presentation over to Chris, I want to say again how excited Westlands is to be here. Getting here has involved significant work by collaboration among numerous state, federal, and local agencies, and Westlands appreciates their collective efforts. In particular, the district would like to thank the Department of Water Resources and the Department of Fish and Wildlife for their work and support in bringing this project to fruition. Thank you for your time today. We look forward to answering any of your questions. Chris is going to continue with the presentation, and after Chris, Westlands General Counsel John Rubin will make a few statements also. Chris?
Yes. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Jose. Good morning, board. I'm Chris Campbell, co-owner and technical director with CBEC Eco Engineering, practicing in water resources for more than 19 years with at least 15 years, specifically in the Yola bypass, preparing and overseeing a range of hydraulic design and hydraulic impact studies, supporting various restoration and infrastructure improvement projects for a range of clients. Next slide. To briefly reiterate the staff report, the hydraulic impacts for the project were analyzed and were found to have no significant impact on the flood control system. We adapted a CVFED RAS 2D model for existing and project conditions and evaluated the relative impact of the project on water surface elevations and velocities based off of the 1957 design flows. As shown by the graphic on the left, and in the absence of significant land lowering, the key elements of the project that could potentially impact flood conveyance are the conversion of irrigated pasture to tidal marsh, the construction of a perimeter berm, and the construction of a shallow stockpile behind the restricted height levee. Next slide. However, and as demonstrated by the relative change in the maximum water surface elevations shown to the left, there are no flood impacts against the project levees, and the localized increases in the center of the bypass are largely contained to the footprint of Westlands property. They are de minimis when you consider that the increases are in the order of half of an inch to an inch on top of flood depths that are 15 feet deep, and that the increases are within the margin of error of the model. Next slide. Regarding tidal and nuisance flooding concerns raised by Mound Farms, the graphic on the left shows the project lands to the southeast of the green line and non-project lands, including Mound Farms, to the northwest of the green line. The green line represents the new perimeter berm, or the proposed perimeter berm, design of which was informed by balancing cut fill on site, flood modeling to avoid hydraulic impacts, and tidal modeling to maximize tidal inundation while avoiding offsite impacts by meeting or exceeding the elevations of exterior berms being breached by the project. And in line with the perimeter berm are upgraded water control structures that continue to meet the irrigation demands in the summer and the drainage needs in the winter. The northeast tide gate at the authorized point of diversion on the tow drain to the east will be upgraded at its present location. However, its function is not changing. The tide gate will be operated by Westlands and Mound Farms in the same manner that it is presently operated during both summer and winter conditions. As such, no new tidal or nuisance flooding impacts will be generated by this upgraded feature. The existing central tight gate to the south, which is being removed to support the restoration project, will provide unmuted tidal action via the central irrigation canal. The portion of the irrigation canal shown in red in the center of the graphic is being reclaimed as part of the restoration project. Next slide, please. However, tidal action further to the north of the project area is being isolated from the remaining irrigation system in the summer at a new culvert crossing when the gates are closed. And in the winter, when the gates are open, it'll accommodate drainage from lands to the north, and it will function much like the existing central tide gate that is being removed. In combination, no new tidal or nuisance flooding impacts will be created by removal of the central tide gate and the installation of the new culvert crossing. More so, potential tidal or nuisance flooding from restoration project further to the west and to the north onto grazing lands retained by wetlands or onto lands owned by Mound Farms will be avoided by the construction of a perimeter berm and the installation of flap gates on an existing culvert crossing. In the summer, the flap gates are open and tidally charge the irrigation system that services Westland and Mound Farms. In the winter, during the threat of impending YOLO bypass flooding, the flap gates are closed and the function to prohibit tidal action to the north of the upgraded culvert crossing, but still allow for runoff and floodwaters to exit south to the delta. As such, no new tidal or nuisance flooding impacts are generated via modifications to this existing crossing. And in fact, these modifications provide a benefit to Mound Farms by reducing the frequency and duration of frequent flooding. Next slide, please. These frequent flood reduction benefits are also provided by the construction of the perimeter berm, which delineates the limits of restoration and is up to 3 feet above adjacent field grade. As shallow floodwaters begin to break out of the tow drain, flowing across the restored YOLO Flyway Farms and backwatering across lower YOLO, the nuisance flooding measures built into the perimeter berm and the upgraded water control structures, which protect the grazing lands retained by wetlands, also afford the same protections to Mound Farms. In conclusion, we concur with the staff report that there are no significant flood impacts to the flood control system nor to our neighbor Mound Farms. Further, the project features have been designed to maintain the integrity of the irrigation delivery system and to avoid tidal and nuisance flooding measures impacts to Mound Farms. Thank you for your time today, and I can be available to answer any questions that you might have.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. My name is John Rubin, and I am General Counsel for Westlands Water District. I appreciate the opportunity to address the board and briefly respond to the July 22nd letter Mr. Donald Mooney sent on behalf of Mound Farms to the President. I have 5 points I would like to make. First, nothing in the letter contradicts your staff's conclusions that the project's hydraulic impacts will be less than significant. And nothing in the letter contradicts your staff's conclusion that the project will not adversely impact Mound. Second, in the letter, Mound presents issues that are not material to the board. Most of the issues were not presented in the protest to the district's application that Mound filed with the board, and all of the issues are unrelated to flooding impacts. Mound's main complaint concerns the Sweetwater Company, a complaint, again, unrelated to flood impacts and builds upon 3 fatal flaws. My third, fourth, and fifth points. My third point, in its letter, Mound asserts that the permit should be denied because the application is deficient. That notice was not provided. The application was sufficient and notice was provided. Mound cites Section 15 to Title 23 of the California Code of Regulations. Section 15 provides that the board has discretion to deny a permit if the applicant fails to supply information the board deems necessary, including the names of all adjacent landowners. The district worked diligently to ensure the board had and has all of the necessary information. And Mound concedes that the district provided the board with the names of adjacent landowners, including the Sweetwater Company. Simply put, the record demonstrates the application meets the board's needs and the requirements of the regulations. Fourth, Mound implies that it must protect the interests of Sweetwater. However, it has no standing to raise or otherwise assert claims for Sweetwater. And fifth, Mound also implies that Sweetwater did not protest the application because Sweetwater was not aware that the application was on file or was not aware of the impacts of the project. Although Mound asserts there is no evidence that Sweetwater received notice of the application, the evidence exists and it is part of the board's record. The board provided Sweetwater notice on October 10th, 2019. And the idea that Sweetwater was not aware of impacts of the project is frankly absurd. The two shareholders within the Sweetwater Company are the district and Mound. Representatives of the district and Mound make up the board of Sweetwater. And indeed, as Mr. Gutierrez mentioned, it is my understanding Sweetwater considered the protesting the application and did not file a protest. For these reasons and the reasons provided by your staff and the district respectfully requests that you accept the staff's recommendation and issue the encroachment permit. Again, thank you for the opportunity to present today.
Okay, does that conclude the presentations?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. My understanding is that DWR concurs with this application. Do they want to make a presentation at this time?
Thank you, Mr. President. This is Dan Reardon with DWR. I just wanted to make a very brief statement of support.
Please proceed.
Thank you. So as I said, my name is Dan Reardon. I'm in the Division of Environmental Services with DWR and Environmental Program Manager, and I oversee the restoration of the Delta Smelt restoration requirements as required by the 2019 Fish and Wildlife Service Biological Opinion. This project is under the DWR Eco Restore umbrella and partially fulfills those habitat requirements under that biological opinion. And I just wanted to say that DWR fully supports this project and would very much like to see it go to construction this year. And I'm happy to answer any questions that the board or anybody may have.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that was the presentation of the applicant. Do the board members have any questions? Not hearing any. I'm going to proceed with opponents of the project. Are there opponents to the project?
Yes, this is Donald Mooney on behalf of Mound Farms.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. Please proceed.
Yes, and we're identified as opponents. Well, first of all, Mr. President Edwards and board members, thank you for the opportunity to provide a presentation today. And I wanted to start off by saying, you refer to us as the opponents of the project. And we're opponents of the project only in that we believe it's premature. Mound Farms does not oppose the project going forward at the appropriate time. We believe that there are project benefits to the Delta Smelt and other wildlife, and Mound Farms believes that the project is good for the state, good for the environment, but everything has to be addressed at the appropriate time it has to be addressed prior to the project going forward. And so our position here is that the board consideration of this application for the encroachment permit is premature. the Sweetwater issues have not been resolved. Now, granted that Westlands identified Sweetwater as an adjacent landowner, but as we stated in our comment letter the other day, the easement from Sweetwater, Sweetwater holds there, that goes right through the middle of the proposed project, will be destroyed by the project. That is a private property interest that is going to be impacted and flooded and destroyed. And Mound Farms, and BJ Susich will comment a little bit later about the relationship between Sweetwater and Mound Farms. But the point is that that private property interest is going to be flooded and destroyed. Westlands has had years to resolve this issue. It hasn't been resolved as of this hearing. They identify it as easement to be abandoned. There is nothing from Sweetwater Board or in your record before you that indicates that that easement has been abandoned, that it has been transferred, or that it has been purchased in any way, shape, or form. So, so what this really comes down to is approval of this permit will authorize the destruction and flooding of Sweetwater's private property interest without Sweetwater's consent or approval. We don't know at this point what Sweetwater's response will be. Sweetwater has been silent on this, and so it would not be appropriate for this board to simply assume that Sweetwater is agreeable to the abandonment of the easement, or that Sweetwater is agreeable to the flooding of its easement. I will also note that there was a comment about that Sweetwater was identified as an adjacent landowner, and it was. Also note that the comment or that the notice to Sweetwater in the application identified goes to care of Westlands. And we have come to understand that Westlands did not send the letter from the flood board, the notice letter from the flood board to Sweetwater until November 7th, after the deadline to respond or file a protest, which was October 30th. Given the potential conflict between Sweetwater's interest and Westland's interest, certainly they should have circulated it in time for Sweetwater to have met that protest deadline. Mound Farms and Westlands have been engaged in very extensive discussions and conversations. And we are close to, we believe we are close to resolving Mound Farms issues, which we also hope would help resolve Sweetwater's issues. And we hoped we would have been able to have done that before this hearing today. Unfortunately, just the timing and some delays associated with providing responses and to drafts and things like that made it so that we haven't been able to come to this board and say that that Mound Farms protests have been resolved, and that the issues associated with Sweetwater have been resolved in terms of the easement. I'm trying to see if there's anything else here. Mr. Rubin talked about that there's no flooding, that there's no issues associated with flooding that would be associated with the board's jurisdiction. And as I mentioned earlier, we disagree with that because it is flooding of Sweetwater's easement. and Mound Farms does have an interest in Sweetwater. And again, there's no no agreement with Sweetwater. And then I'll ask Mr. Selby or Mr. Susich if they have any further comments.
Thank you.
This is BJ Susich, counsel to Mound Farms. I could help the board here with maybe a little bit more background on Sweetwater and what is this entity that Don spoke of and others have mentioned. So Sweetwater is a mutual water company. It is essentially a private utility that owns the water rights to all of Mound Farms and Westlands, not independently, but one collective ownership of water with the license permits over the entirety. If you read Sweetwater's Articles of Incorporation, it actually sets out a geography that essentially paints a picture all the way around Westlands property, including the project, including the property they're maintaining, and including Mound Farms. There's no delineation between it. Sweetwater has water rights that accrue to whoever owns the land within those geographies. It's not unique to Westlands or Mound. It's whoever owns the real estate gets to benefit from the collective water right. So our concern here, there's been a lot of talk of Mound Farms. There's no flooding on Mound Farms property. I just want to be clear that the board should not be lulled into that that's really quite the issue. We're not so concerned after talking through with Westlands the design of the project that although we don't know what's going to happen, we're not immediately concerned about the flooding on Mound Farms given the construction that's been described in terms of berms. Our concern is that the water system and structure of Sweetwater, which benefits all of the properties, is partially being dismantled and given away here, and Sweetwater has not agreed to that. Now, there was a letter obviously sent to Sweetwater. However, it was sent care of Westlands. Westlands did not turn that over to the board of directors. The board of directors of Sweetwater is 4 Westlands employees and 1 other person. So that other person did not get notice of the letter. Now, that other director asked about the letter and was ultimately provided it on November 7th after the deadline had passed, but Westlands had essentially sat on it. Mr. Gutierrez had said that, well, at some point, Sweetwater's board had considered this issue and decided not to respond. And of course, this is, well after the response deadline. However, the board member that made the motion to send a response is the disinterested director. The other 4 directors, all Westlands employees, are the ones who said, well, let's not respond and did not further that course of action. So Westlands, from my perspective, is sort of not really allowing Sweetwater to function and respond on its own by essentially taking action that I would say is not consistent with fiduciary duties to look out for the best interest of Sweetwater to allow that to happen. And so that's how we got here. So in terms of Sweetwater and Mound Farms relationship, I just want to be clear that Mound Farms has a very direct relationship through Sweetwater to everything that happens in the entire geography of Sweetwater. Mound Farms shares in the costs of Sweetwater. Mound Farms shares in the water rights. Mound Farms shares in the easements that help keep the infrastructure together. And we have particular concerns about that ditch, the one that Chris Campbell had highlighted and Jose had highlighted going, you kind of saw it running sort of northeast to southwest. That ditch has utility to Sweetwater, and Sweetwater has not been presented with the decision of whether it's willing to abandon that ditch or what sort of consideration it might want to abandon that ditch. And just so you know, we, as Don said, Mound and Westlands have been in discussions. Those discussions have included resolving the issues on behalf of Sweetwater, as they're the 2 shareholders of Sweetwater. So I want to be clear that we haven't just been discussing Mound issues, but we've been trying to put the whole thing to bed. And there have been discussions of alternatives or payments or things that could be made for Sweetwater to forego that ditch, including potential construction of other ditches. And we think that this board really should have the full picture in front of it before it is willing to decide the issue of whether flooding is a concern. There's no telling what Sweetwater might ask or want or might insist on in terms of changes of the projects or alternative ditches or easements. And it's just premature without knowing that to say we're going to approve a project that's going to literally flood a private party interest, a private easement. With you know, there's no dispute here that the Sweetwater's easement would be inundated with floodwater. And that is our primary concern. It's not, again, the project, I'll say the same thing as Dawn. We really like the project. I don't feel great about being in a spot of opposing the project. And as Dawn said, we really don't want to be opposing the project. We just want the project to be complete and comprehensive, and for that complete and comprehensive project to be brought to this board for consideration. There was some mention of, you know, water rights not being affected. Mound would have the same volume of water as it had before. That's a little bit misleading in the sense that all of Sweetwater's water right, the collective water right, will be ratcheted down as a result of this project, because there will be water rights either given to DWR or lost because of the flooding inundation, which means that Sweetwater will have less water rights overall. Now, Mound Farms may be entitled to its percentage of Sweetwater, but the way water gets divided up, or who can pump all at the same time, starts to cause conflicts, and that reduction in water will have tangential effects on Sweetwater's water rights, even though the EIR for this project specifically says that there won't be an effect on the water rights of Sweetwater. That's really just not true. There are a lot of other, you know, cost sharing issues and stuff like that that this board, you know, is not exactly might care about. You're obviously more directed at flooding, but I just want to point out that there are many, many impacts involving Sweetwater and Sweetwater's rights that really ought to be resolved, and particularly for this board, that the easement that would be flooded. I think that's all I want to say. I think that the issue is just that this board ought to hear, Westlands ought to come and say that it has secured the right from Sweetwater to flood its private easement before it comes to the flood board and says, hey, will you approve our permit that's effectively going to do that? And that's all we're asking for. With that, I will conclude. I think there may be another person who wants to speak as well.
Good morning. My name is Selby Moore. I'm the president of Mound Farms, and I'm also the only board member of the Sweetwater Mutual Water Company who's not an employee of Westlands. We've said for 8 years that we're for the project. We think it's a good project. We'd like to see it go through. There are just a few things that are hang-ups that, as you heard from Don and from BJ, that haven't been addressed. I just would like to make sure that we get input, let me be very clear, I am not speaking for Sweetwater. I am not a spokesperson for Sweetwater. I'm speaking for myself as president of Mound Farms and as a board member of the board of directors of Sweetwater, but not speaking for Sweetwater. We just want to make sure that those are all addressed before the project goes forward. Water rights is very important. 7 or 8 years ago in the comments of the draft EIR before it went final, Sweetwater's general counsel, Westlands, Mound Farms, a number of other individuals went back and forth with SWFCA as they were developing the EIR, asking about the water rights. And to my best of my recollection, those were the answers we got from SWFCA were that those would be addressed at the time they get there. There were no, in the EIR, there was no addressing of the water rights other than saying they wouldn't be impacted. So what I'd like to conclude with is just to make sure that everybody understands we're not opposed to the project conceptually. It's just we have details that need to be worked out prior to moving forward with this, and they're important to Mound Farms, and I believe they're important to Sweetwater. Thank you.
Excuse me, could we have your name again, please?
First name is Selby, S-E-L-B-Y. Last name is Moore, M-O-H-R.
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, any other people that want to speak in opposition to this action? Okay, any questions from the board at this point?
President Edgar, this is Jeet Dua. If I could just address the board briefly.
Oh, thank you, Jeet.
Appreciate it. Thank you, President Edgar, members of the board. I just would like to clarify a couple of issues raised by the protesters in this matter regarding the right to protest and some 30-day cutoff period. There is nothing in our regs, and as the board is aware, people can actually show up at the hearing and protest the matter before the board without notice. Moreover, there is nothing in our regulations requiring that someone submit a protest within 30 days of receipt of a adjacent landowner notice. That is not contained in our regulations. What is contained is that within 30 days of receipt of an application, the board shall determine whether the application is complete. And then once the application is deemed complete, the board shall send a notice of the pending application and its contents to each adjacent landowner identified by the applicant. And as Justin Logan has already indicated, board staff does its independent review, and those notifications were provided. However, there is not a time deadline on which to send those adjacent landowner letters, nor is there a requirement that the adjacent landowner submit a protest within 30 days of receipt of that letter. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Susich, just a question for myself. I'm interested in the mutual water company. What's the composition of the shares of that company?
So Mound Farms owns approximately, it's 17 something percent. Westlands owns the balance of it, as far as we can tell. The geography of Sweetwater is a little difficult because it was penciled out before the construction of the Deepwater Ship Channel. So the eastern edge is a little off because that ship channel came later. But those are the ownership percentages. I don't know if this
who owns the 17%? I thought you said Sweetwater owned those.
Sorry, if I misspoke. Mound Farms owns 17% of Sweetwater. Sweetwater is the mutual water company.
Okay, all right.
So Mound owns 17%. Westlands owns the balance, as near as we can tell. And I don't know if this is germane to your question, but I guess I want to point out that just because Westlands owns a majority of Sweetwater does not mean that it has the power to do things detrimental to Sweetwater. It's employee service directors, but they have fiduciary duties under the corporations code to look out for Sweetwater, not themselves.
Yeah, I'm aware of that. Is it your testimony that the shares of the Sweetwater, the mutual company, is going down from 17% to a smaller percent?
No, so actually what will happen is, as a result of the whole project, the project area will be carved off to Mound Farms. So part of their whole project is they want to carve off the water right from Sweetwater so that part of Sweetwater's water right will no longer be owned by Sweetwater and will be transferred to DWR directly. So as a result, Sweetwater's geography would shrink, and now Mound Farms will be a higher percentage because Westlands is keeping certain acres, but because it gave land to DWR or transferred land to DWR, it will own less. And so Mound will actually become a larger percentage of Sweetwater. And that's actually some of the cost trouble here, is that Mound is going to be enjoying the same infrastructure as before, but now suddenly its costs are going up. And Sweetwater, as a utility, speaking from Sweetwater's perspective as a utility, it's not going to be recoup any costs from the DWR's parcels. Right? Sweetwater's going to have less, if you think of it as a utility, Sweetwater's going to have less taxpayers sort of to contribute to keeping the water infrastructure together, which is harmful to Mound Farms.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions from the board to these folks?
I don't have anything here, Mr. President.
Okay. Okay, at this point, I'm going to ask that the proponents of the project be given a rebuttal period of time, and Jose, I'll refer it back to you for rebuttal period.
Thank you, President Edgar. I believe John Rubin has a statement he'd like to make as a rebuttal.
Thank you.
Just very briefly, I would note that based upon the comments, the objections raised today by representatives from Mound Farms, what we heard was, one, Mound supports the project. Two, Mound is not concerned about flooding on its property. And three, they are expressing concerns for the property interest that the Sweetwater Company has in an easement. I would note that in the staff report on page 4, the staff accurately reflects that pursuant to Title 23, Article 2.5, Section 12C, protests must be based solely upon flood control concerns. With a focus on that issue, again, I would reiterate that nothing that we've heard today, like nothing in the letters submitted by Mounds or its protest, contradicts your staff's conclusion. And for that reason, we again ask that you accept your staff's recommendation and grant the permit requested by the district.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to deviate a little bit from my procedure and ask Mr. Mooney, do you have any concluding comments?
You're on mute, Mr. Mooney.
Thank you. Yes, we do have flood concerns. I mean, the response would be that we do have flood concerns, and those flood concerns are to the interest of Sweetwater and that easement, and that is clearly within the board's jurisdiction. Those are, again, that's a flooding of a private property interest that was not identified in the application, and it's and as such, that provides the board discretion, I would think, and maybe even an obligation to deny the application at this point in time. And again, we don't oppose the project. We just think that it is a bit premature for the board's consideration, and would hope that Westlands would quickly resolve these matters and bring it back to the board's attention, and at which time we would be here supporting it, or certainly not objecting to it. I think that is all, unless BJ has anything else to add.
Mr. President, it's BJ Susich. May I say something briefly?
Of course.
So I echo what Don said. We are concerned about flooding of a private easement. And again, Sweetwater is not a landowner exactly. It's a utility that exists for the landowners. Sweetwater actually only owns a small 5-acre parcel where some pumps are located, but its geography covers like 3,000 or more acres, something like 4,200 acres overall. It's a utility that exists for the landowners. Mound's concerns are a direct interest through Sweetwater, but Sweetwater is not like an adjacent landowner here. It is the utility. It is the water utility for Mound and Westland's property that they currently own. It's not, this is a little bit different, that, you know, it doesn't exist independent of Mound Farms and Sweetwater. I'm sorry, Mound Farms and Westlands. The other thing I wanted to say is that one reason this board should be concerned is that you heard a whole presentation about no flooding concerns, but Sweetwater very well may insist on some sort of alternative water conveyance system or ditches or levees or things like that to be constructed in order for it to be willing to give up its easement. And where's the presentation of that? That's why this is premature. The presentation you've had is about their current design of the project, but there's no assurance that Sweetwater will be willing to give up its current easement without asking for some changes. And you should see the whole project then if that's what happens.
Thank you. Any questions from the board at this point? Do you see any, Leslie?
Nothing here, Mr. President.
Okay, I'm going to ask for comments from any member of the public who's interested in this item. Ryan, you're going to have to unmute the public to see if anybody, whether you have an email to see if anybody wants to comment.
Okay, I've gotten no emails so far.
Mr. President, this is Board Counsel Jeet Dua again. I just would like to make a comment for our new board members who may not be aware of this and the way our permits work. But just to just as a matter of review, the issuance of a permit does not allow for the work to proceed, as the board knows, until a core letter is received in this instance. But where there are real estate issues as the ones here, our permits also note that other licenses or rights may need to be required or acquired before you can move forward with work on the project. So just so the new board members know that if approval is deemed appropriate by them, that construction will not be able to go forward until they've resolved the real estate issues, meaning the applicant resolves its real estate issues with the protesters, in this case, Mound Farms. Thank you.
Okay, does anybody see any other questions from the public?
I see no questions at this time.
Okay, I'm going to bring this matter back to the board and close the public hearing. Could I have a motion and a second to close the public hearing, please?
I'll make the motion.
To close.
I'll second.
Okay, give me that again, please. Who moved?
I did.
Okay, Joe.
I second it.
And Mary Jane. Okay, thank you. Okay, comments from the board members at this point?
Through the chair, I would just like to clarify a couple of things.
Yes, of course.
On the board that they made reference to, it's a 5-member board for the Sweetwater district. Is that correct?
It's a mutual company, water company.
The mutual? Okay.
Yeah, it's a board that is a mutual water company, very similar to the Nokomis Mutual Water District, and they have shares on it. And what's happening here is that because of the diminution of the property, the shares of the water company for Mounds is going to go up, and therefore their costs are going to go up. So they want some money. That's what it's all about.
As it relates to the protest letter that they had considered, was it a 4-1 vote on that board?
I'm not sure whether the disinterested party actually voted. That may be a question, factual question we need to ask Mr. Mooney about.
Thank you. That was one of it. And the other question I have is the core letter. Is that, I thought I heard in the staff report that they're expecting that next week. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. But Jeet, would you help us out with 2 questions for Mary Jane, please?
Absolutely. Honestly, I cannot answer the first question. I'm not aware of any action taken by Sweetwater or their board in a vote. I believe Mr. Mooney alluded to that, or Mr. Susich. I can't recall which. But yes, my understanding is the Corps is routing the letter, and we expect it within the next week or 2.
Thank you. Would the Corps take up in their letter any issues as it relates to flooding that was been brought up by the opponent of the project?
In terms of tidal flow?
Yeah.
I don't believe so. What the Corps would do is, in addition to any conditions that our board permit, our board staff has deemed appropriate to be included in the permit, the Army Corps would have its own conditions that we would also incorporate into our permit that the applicant would have to comply with.
Thank you. And just an observation, you know, I've been in this situation before on other boards where, you know, there are separate issues that need to be negotiated, and sometimes there's a desire to hold up a permit in order to continue those negotiations. I just want to be clear on this, that these discussions between Westlands, Sweetwater, and the farm continue to continue in order to resolve them, regardless what this board takes as far as the action that we're asked today. Is that correct?
As far as we are concerned, yes, although we cannot compel them. Obviously, Mound Farms and or Sweetwater would have a private claim against Westlands Water District if it were to proceed with its construction, despite the fact that an easement would be adversely affected.
Thank you.
That answers your question.
It does.
But our view has always been that they cannot construct until they resolve all outstanding issues, even though those are private matters between those 2 parties and the board is not involved.
Great. Thank you very much.
Board staff does try to act as a facilitator, though, in those discussions and provide a venue for the parties to resolve those differences.
Thank you. And the reason I ask that is because it's been stated a couple of times during this session is that they agreed to the project. However, they felt it was premature for us to, you know, to approve this item. And I just wanted to make sure that nothing stops them from negotiating terms with each other,
Sure.
Even if this board decides to move forward.
No, and in fact, that's very common, what we hear in, on similar matters where there are ongoing negotiations to resolving outstanding issues.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I have Board Member Ramirez.
Okay, Leslie, could you find out from the members of the staff whether Mr. Selby Moore, who is the disinterested party on the on Sweetwater, whether he actually voted on this matter or whether the other 4 members voted without his attendance? That was Mary Jane's question.
Thank you.
And I believe he was not in attendance, but I'm not sure of that. Can you find out, please?
Certainly.
Thank you. Okay, was that Tim Ramirez that wanted to speak?
Yes, please.
Yes, go ahead, Tim.
Thank you, Bill. I'm looking at the CEQA section of the staff report, and I just wanted to confirm something, I think, based on what I see here. One of the comments that was made during the presentations was that if the solution to the discussion happening now results in a different physical landscape of the project, that then obviously we'd want to consider those things, which I think is probably true. Looks like the CEQA history here, in short, was that it was initially certified in 2013 by the now dissolved state and federal contractors water agency, and now Westlands is the lead agency, and they adopted something in 2018. Presumably, if there was a different physical project and we had other infrastructure in the bypass, that CEQA document would need to be amended again. And if we issued a permit today, we would need to revisit that if there were changes based on the hydraulic analysis. I wanted to confirm that was true with our staff. I don't know if it's for you, Leslie, or for Jeet.
I think Andrea probably would answer that. Leslie, could we get an answer to, oh, there's Leslie.
It's Andrea
Okay.
Buckley.
Yeah, Andrea, thank you.
Yes, I would agree. If there's a significant change in the project plans that we have presented today, it may need to be revisited, and possibly a new action taken by the board. I would defer to operations and permitting on what is considered significant and that would require that new action taken by the board.
And if somebody could point me to one of the conditions in the permit that would trigger that to be revisited. I'm sure there's something there in the standard language. I just want to make sure we call it out.
Andrea, can you help?
Justin, Logan, do you have that handy in terms of revisiting
I'm
the
taking a look
discretionary
right
action?
now.
That should be a condition of the permit, Justin.
Correct. Under general conditions, number 3, this permit does not grant a right to use or construct works on land owned by the Sacramento and San Joaquin Drainage District or on any other land. Also, general condition 9, the permit shall, when required by law, secure the written or order consent of all other public agencies having jurisdiction. Our permit conditions also cite the date on the plan submitted. If there are any potential revisions to those plans, they would need to be submitted to and reviewed by staff. Any minor insubstantial changes to the proposed work may be approved by the chief engineer. Other major changes to the proposed project would need to come before the board again.
Great, thank you. That was the last one was what I was looking for. There's something that changes the design. There's something in our permit that would allow us to go back and revisit the discussion and the flood issues. Thank you.
Yes, I believe that's agency condition number 16. All work approved by this permit shall be in accordance with the submitted drawings and specifications.
Great. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Andrea.
Mr. President, going back to Board Member Griego's question, I do have a response.
And that response is?
From Jose Gutierrez, who messaged me that there was no vote. A motion was made, but there was no second.
So there wasn't any formal action then by Sweetwater.
That's what I'm understanding.
Okay. Okay, Mary Jane, does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, any other questions from the board?
I have a question.
Joe.
Oh, I don't have a question. I have a comment.
It does. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So my comment is that the flooding issue, as far as the board is concerned, and as far as our concern about the flood system, is not this tidal flooding. During the flood flows, Sweetwater is about 10 feet underwater or more. So it's flooded as far as our project concerns are. And normally that's the key thing that we focus on. Does this project affect the project's ability to pass the design flows? And clearly, I don't see any evidence that this project affects the design flows in any significant way.
Okay, any other members of the board?
I don't have anything else, Mr. President.
Okay, then I would ask, what is the pleasure of the board, please?
I would move to adopt staff's recommendation.
I'll second, Bill.
Okay, moved by Joe, second by Tim, that the staff recommendation for this project be approved. Could we have a roll call vote on this, please, Ryan?
Board Member Griego,
Yes.
Board Member Johnson,
Aye.
Board Member Ramirez,
Aye.
Board Member Valines,
Aye.
Board Member Countryman,
Yes.
Vice President Dolan,
Yes.
President Edgar.
Yes. This project is approved. This permit is approved. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance. At this point, we'll have a 5-minute recess. Ryan, I guess we're ready to go. Okay, members, Leslie, can you hear me?
Mr. President.
Okay. I guess we're ready to go. We're back from our break. Members, we're on item 9A, which is a budget update. And Catherine Baines, our Director of Administration, has an informational briefing on the Central Valley Flood Protection Board's program activities for the 2019-20 and the 2020-21 fiscal years. Catherine, please.
Good morning, Mr. President and members of the board. You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure. I'm sorry, I do not have a camera, so I'm incognito here. Okay. Again, my name is Catherine Baines. I am also the administrative officer for the board. And going over the budget, it's going to be kind of a high-level overview. Any questions you have, please ask me. Let's go to the next slide, Ryan. Okay. So for our operating part of the budget, it's a little over 10 million, comes from general fund. The median expenditures range from anywhere from 700K to 850K each month. It pretty much goes by if we have vacancies or not. There's a little bit of a change every month, it seems. That basically pays for just direct labor and operating expenses. We just really don't have a lot left over after that. We do follow the budget very closely. We generate a detailed budget report on a monthly basis. If you'd like a copy of that, please let me know. I'd be happy to send that and continue to send that every month. We also track all the projects and programs specific to funding outside of the operating budget. And these are things like our reimbursable projects, any propositions, bonds, project-specific work, and I'll show you those numbers in another slide coming up. Next slide. So here's one. I wanted to show you just a little snapshot of the roll-up. So as you can see at the top, it's 2017-18, and then 18-19, and 19-20. So what I'm showing you is basically the numbers that we ended the fiscal year with this last June. So you can see the 10.4 at the top for operating, and then we have a little bit in Prop 1E that I believe has already been expended. And then the SSJDD feasibility study, we were given a $1.3 dollar amount to work with for that specific project. Then at the bottom, you'll see the reimbursables. So we have a Safeco reimbursable, and this is a team that Greg Harvey manages. And then we also have our CEQA account that really doesn't get touched unless we absolutely need it for some reason. So when you look, it looks like we have 21 million. We really don't. It's project specific. And like I said, the operating part of our budget is about 10.4. All right, next slide. So this, I'm sorry, this is just a little bit fuzzy. I wanted to show you kind of the breakdown within the budget and how we track for each one of our sections and our branches and our sections. If you look at the right, where we have all of the numbers in red, this is how we ended our fiscal year as of June. So you can see where plan implementation, what their actuals were, 1.5, overhead, excuse me, is specific to where we pay out board members, for example. Permitting, enforcement, inspections, environmental, land management, and then you'll see at the end here, we have a COVID-19 emergency. These are the funds that we have paid for ourselves But we're tracking all of it in hopes that we will get reimbursed from the government. And then at the very bottom, you'll see the Safeco reimbursement and where we're at to date. Okay, next slide. So I wanted to give you an update on the positions that we have. So we did have a vacancy for board members, but luckily we don't any longer. So we have all 7 board members filled. We have full-time employees. We have right now 44. We have 3 vacancies that we're working on. Part-time employees, these are administrative help for us. So we have 7 and we have 4 vacancies, and that's a total of 11. And then we have a new section that will be Prop 68, and this will be a program. And so we haven't hired for those. We're just getting the vacancies lined up so that we can start doing interviewing for those. So you can see we're a small board. I think we do extremely well with the work that we manage. It's just that we don't have the cycles to handle everything. So next slide. So because of that, we have assessments for support services. And I'm sure most of you know, we pay through the assessment process. It's per our 2008 MOA with DWR. And what they provide to us are all of these services that take a lot of people and time to go through. And there's so many cycles that I just listed the main ones. So IT support, it's how we purchase our computers and whatever's needed. Our human resources, they do a lot of the paperwork and processing. Personnel, payroll, benefits. We work with them on contracts. We work with the budget office. Accounting has to help us put all the money where it's allotted. Travel, they help us with that. Procurement, we do follow their policy guidelines, which are the state guidelines. We do get legal support from them from time to time. Logistics, facilities, and there's many others, but that's the main piece. And we get charged approximately 30% in overhead by the number of staff. So if we have vacancies, we're not charged for that. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so we have some unappropriated funds, and I wanted to give you a snapshot of that. If you look at the first column of 17-18, you can see it's a total of 718,000. And then the next year it's 756, and then this last year 704. But when you look at 2019-20 broken down, you can kind of see where the averages are. Now for permit fees, which is the last line going across, you can see we started collecting fees in 2019, and then 19-20, you can see where it goes up a little bit. And then we started tracking by quarter because we felt that was a good way to sort of see where a trend was from this year to next year. We'll actually start to be able to trend with that data. Okay, next slide. So the unappropriated funds, it's revenue collected. It's about $700K annually. And we get this through rental of state property fees, state land royalty fees, our inspection permit fees. So the funds are tracked, but we can't use them. They are transferred into the state's general fund, and we can only appropriate them through the legislative process. So I looked this up in water code, and basically that's how it was set up, and that's how it's supposed to flow through. Next slide. So looking at our budget for the next year, we're looking at a 5% cut, which I'm sure everybody's aware of. For us, that's about $500K. But because all of our operating budget is labor and operating expenses, we just don't have a whole lot of areas to cut. We run pretty tight as it is. So we're looking at, travel cuts, which sort of makes sense since nobody's traveling. IT equipment, we had already purchased because of COVID this last fiscal year, limiting all other expenses as we can. And then if we have any vacant positions. And then on top of that, we're looking and hoping that we do get reimbursed for the COVID-19 expenditures, which is about $250K to date. So that's kind of what we have coming up. Are there any questions? I know that was kind of quick, but are there any questions about the budget in general or assessments or unappropriated funds?
Catherine, could you go back to your chart that relates to the actual numbers that we spent? It's one of the first ones.
Yeah, I think it is the first one, Ryan. These expenditures or the other high level?
No, that one that he had.
This one?
With the other one that it had with the red.
Oh.
There.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, this is what we're actually spent for this year.
Mm-hmm.
And our budget was what at this point?
It was 10.4.
10.4. So we have an excess of 400,000. Where's that shown?
Well, it's actually a little less. When this report was run, it was a little bit before the close of June.
Mm-hmm.
And what we had also had in there was the 500K towards the contract that we added money to. I'm trying to remember the name of it off the top of my head. But we really only had about 100K in surplus, which is about where we want to be, because there's some expenses that come in July. We want to make sure that we can, that we have enough to close out the year. So this is a close picture. I think it'll be a better picture when we run the report for this month, and then you'll really see what we ended up with.
Okay. Now what happens to that money? Is it used to provide funds for the next year's budget? It's carried over, or is it just lost?
Our understanding is that, I wish we could carry it over. Our understanding is that it goes back to DWR.
Okay.
I thought it went back to the state originally, but it does go back to DWR.
So we really are considered a division of DWR for budgeting purposes then?
Yes.
They call it a program, Mr. President.
A program of DWRs?
Correct.
Right.
Not an independent agency like the Delta Stewardship Council or anybody like that?
Correct. Correct.
Okay. All right.
Because it still looks like DWR in the budget line in the governor's budget, and then we're underneath them. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I had. Anybody else? Okay. One of the things that we're going to be working on and getting a better handle on are these costs for permitting and overhead. It looks, what's that overhead percentage of the overall cost? Catherine, have you calculated that?
The second line item, is that what you're looking at?
Well, that's
operations overhead.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, it's considered line management, and so it's any position that touches everything versus specific. Like if the engineers are working on a specific program within the PIC branch, then they would be more specific, as listed here as enforcement or permitting or inspections. We have overhead. Part of what Jeet does, because he touches everything, he would be considered overhead.
Okay.
Mr. President, in addition, that's all the overhead and line management for all of the department as well.
Okay.
That's why the number is so high.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Any other board members have questions?
It looks like Board Member Countryman has his hand raised.
Okay, Joe?
That hand raised was from the last item.
Okay.
All right, no questions. Thank you, Catherine.
Sure.
All right, again, for the members, item 9B has been removed from the agenda. I realize, and Leslie realizes, that the packet was prepared and the staff reports were prepared using the old numbers and so on. So we chose to show the removal of 9B as it's shown on the agenda, which is a little confusing, and we won't do that again. We'll find a better way to notice everybody about the change, either delete the item, cross-check it, or do something that's a little more clear for everybody. But sorry for the inconvenience. 9B has been removed from the agenda. Okay, we'll go to 9C, which is the Sacramento Riverbank project, post-authorization change and environmental impact statement. Actually, it's a EIS/EIR for the additional 80,000 linear feet of bank protection. Connie Perkins from our staff and Kim Carcel from the Army Corps of Engineers have this report, and I'll start with Connie.
Thank you, President Edgar and members of the board. My name is Connie Perkins, board staff. Today, Dave Wilden with the Division of Flood Management and Department of Water Resources and Kim Carcel with the Corps will provide a background information for the Sacramento River Bank Protection Project and request approval and certification of the post-authorization change report in the programmatic EIS/EIR. As a non-federal sponsor for the flood control system in the Central Valley and the non-federal sponsor for the Sacramento River Bank Protection Project, the board has continuously provided support to the Corps on behalf of the state for this project. Through the memorandum of agreement between the board and DWR, DWR provides project management for various projects and programs under the board's authority, including the Sacramento River Bank Protection Project. So now I will pass this on to Dave Wilden with the Department of Water Resources to discuss the details of the project and the requested action items. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Connie. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. As Connie mentioned, we're here to provide some background on the Sacramento Riverbank Protection Project, Phase 2, 80,000 linear feet extension, post-authorization change report, and EIR/EIS. Last month, I came before the board to present the background and status of the entire Sacramento Riverbank Protection Project. So today we're focusing on the specific 80,000 linear feet extension approval by the board through the resolution 2020-04. This presentation today will cover the SAC Bank roles and authorities, provide a background on the Packer itself, which will be provided by Kim Carcel of the Corps, and now a summary of the CEQA findings and process, and I'll be doing that on behalf of DWR. Then we will recommend to approve the resolution and have any opportunities for questions and discussions. Thank you. Next slide. So we are here to ask that the board adopt resolution 2020-04 to certify the final EIR/EIS, adopt the findings and fact and statement of overriding consideration, adopt the final EIR/EIS mitigation monitoring and reporting program, approve the Packer for the SAC Bank program to amend the scope of current authorization by adding an additional 80,000 lineal feet of bank protection, and lastly, to delegate the authority to the Central Valley Flood Protection Board Executive Officer to execute the notice of determination. Next slide, please. Just a reminder, the project sponsor, this is a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers program. They are the federal responsible for planning, design, construction, mitigation, and O&M manual updates. The non-federal sponsor is the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. DWR is working on their behalf. This project sponsor is responsible for the lands, easements, right-of-way, locations, and disposals, what we call the LYRP, requirements and process, and the transfer of operation and maintenance responsibility to the local maintaining agencies. Next slide, please. The Army Corps of Engineers is operating under the federal authority of the Flood Control Act of 1960, the River Basin Monetary Authorization Act of 1974, Joint Resolution of Congress for Section 140, and primarily the Water Resources Development Act of 2007, the WRDA, which authorized the second phase amendment, adding 80,000 lineal feet to the existing phase 2 authorization, which was 405,000 feet. The state is operating under California Water Code sections 8617, 12648, and 12649. Next slide, please. At this point, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Kim Carcel, Water Resources Branch Chief, Planning Division, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Sacramento District, to discuss the post-authorization change report.
Thank you, Dave. Just a quick sound check. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Kim. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, good morning. It's still morning. Good morning, President Edgar and members of the board, and thank you for inviting the Army Corps of Engineers to participate in today's briefing to you. I want to start out by saying that the Sacramento Bank Protection Project is somewhat an unusual authority for us in the Sacramento District. It is an authority to provide protection to a federal project, the Sacramento River Flood Control Project, which was authorized in 1917. It was early recognized that the Sacramento River Flood Control Project was subject to erosive forces of the river system and that there is federal interest in protecting that system. As Dave mentioned, there have been a series of authorizations for federal involvement, each providing for linear feet of work to protect for bank protection. As the linear feet would run out, additional authorization has been provided. What we're talking about today is the authorization from WRDA 2007, which allowed for the an additional 80,000 linear feet of bank protection. So the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers methodologies, practices, and policies have evolved since the first time that we have started the bank protection with the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. In this case, with this 80,000 linear feet that was authorized, we are required to incrementally justify federal involvement on a basin by basin in each basin. This is a big change, and we recognize that. So let me talk a little bit about the PACR, the Post-Authorization Change Report. We can, although we were authorized in WRDA 2007, we needed to do the documentation to confirm federal interest in the additional 80,000 linear feet, and we have done that in this PACR. We developed a programmatic EIS and EIR to demonstrate that significant environmental impacts from the future bank protection can be avoided or offset. The PACR provides an avenue for which we can develop a project partnership agreement for construction of the 80,000 linear feet. It establishes a programmatic process in which to complete the construction that is compliant with laws, policies, regulations, and takes into consideration the dynamics of the system and our ability to predict where bank protection will be needed after future high flow events. It provides a framework for federal budget requests. And I'll end this slide by saying that federal participation in the development of the post-authorization change report is complete. Brigadier General Colleton signed and approved the post-authorization change report and the record of decision on June 30th, 2020, which allowed us to recommend it for consideration in FY22 President's budget. So that's good news. We made that deadline. Thank you. So this, as you know, this project is in a large dynamic system in which high flows and some unregulated flows affect the system in very different ways in each event. We needed to develop a methodology that allowed us to confirm federal interest in environmental compliance for sites that we can't yet identify as needing repair. So we took a programmatic approach to do this. This allowed us to estimate costs, estimate benefits, and estimate what the environmental effects would be. And it allowed us to recommend a structured implementation process that has enough flexibility to select sites based on future unknown erosion. Slide 8, please. Okay, as I mentioned, this future 80,000 linear feet is a big difference in the Sacramento Bank Protection Project going forward, in that we can only construct an economically justified basins. I wanted to spend a minute or two talking about our methodology to determine those economically justified basins. We divided the area into 50 economic impact areas. And at the time that we did that, only 24 basins included sites that were eroding. When we looked at those 24 basins, we found that 7 of them were economically justified. Those are, if you look at the map on the right of the slide, and I don't expect you to be able to read that, but those are the basins that are unsurprisingly in highly urbanized areas where the potential for catastrophic consequences in terms of loss of life and property damage is significant. So in those 7 basins, there were 15 erosion sites. And these 15 sites were used to estimate the methods of repair, the costs, and the benefits of implementing the 80,000 linear feet. We used the costs and benefits and extrapolated from the 15 sites to identify the cost and benefits for 80,000 linear feet. I do want to note that the 15 sites are representative samples. We recognize that some of those sites no longer need repair, and that some other sites that are probably in economically justified basins do need repair. I think that we can move to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the things that the post-authorization change report puts in place. So we have identified a methodology to do site selection and implementation process on a regular basis for the Sacramento Bank Protection Project. Basically, every year we will continue to do site reconnaissance as we're doing now, and we will identify sites that need bank repair, and we will rank those sites based on specific engineering criteria. Once the sites are selected, we will write a number of reports. The design documentation reports will be developed on a cohort or a group of sites to be repaired. And we will, in that, identify the method to repair those sites, the cost and the economic benefits, using the most current applicable guidance that we have at the time that we're doing the work. We will also prepare very tiered site-specific environmental compliance documents, such as biological assessments for Section 7 consultation. I want to wrap up my presentation by saying that, well, and let me back up before I do that. The last bullet point on this slide is important. We feel that, again, we used a representative sample. Going forward, we think that there are other subbasins that will be economically justified when we start doing this work again. So back to my wrap up. I wanted to say that approval of the document of the post-authorization change report is approval of this implementation process for future repair that allows Army Corps of Engineers and you as our non-federal sponsors to select sites on future hard to predict erosion and allows us to use new and evolving engineering practices. For example, one of the things we recommended in the post-authorization change report is continued refinement of how we define these basins through further analysis of the hydraulic and hydrologic connectivity between those basins. And lastly, I'll say that the programmatic approach that we've taken here should be an improved, streamlined approach from what we've been doing in the past, and should allow for more repair than we've seen in recent years, obviously contingent on real estate acquisition and the availability of federal and non-federal funding. With that, I'll turn it back over to Dave.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kim. Just want to make sure I didn't mute and people can hear me again.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. So to continue on, I'd like to present some information regarding the CEQA process that is part of the Packer EIR-EIS implementation. Again, my name is Dave Wielden with the Department of Water Resources. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we circulated the programmatic draft EIR-EIS. Draft was circulated December 2014 to February 2015, 66 days. A number of comments were received from federal, state, local agencies, NGOs, tribes, and these were incorporated into the document as necessary. And no substantive change to the analysis or the conclusions. The final programmatic EIS-EIR had a public review from April to May 2020 for a period of approximately 30 days. We received minimal comments, essentially 3 comments that did not result in any changes to or revisions to the EIS-EIR. So that was completed in May of 2020. Next slide, please. There were a number of opportunities for public involvement during this process. The notice of preparation for the EIR and notice of intent for the EIS were published in January of 2009, which accompanied a number of scoping meetings in Colusa, Chico, Sacramento, and Walnut Grove. The draft Packer and draft EIS-EIR public comment period from December 24th to February 27th, 66 days. There were public workshops associated with that held in West Sacramento, Colusa, Walnut Grove, and Chico. The final Packer and final EIS-EIR public review period, again, was from April to May 2020, where we had received those 3 comments that did not result in substantive changes. Next slide, please. Oh, I just realized that I wasn't doing my video. Sorry, folks. A number of comments were, as I mentioned, related to site-specific design and mitigation features. These in potential setback levy alternatives, local coordination during the design and construction process, and vegetation and riverine habitat concerns. As this is a programmatic document, those comments will be resolved site-specific design, permitting, and construction processes when the addendum for phase 2 is implemented and those specific sites and areas come up for the process of planning, design, and construction. Next slide, please. Implementing revegetation will reduce adverse construction impacts, creating a sustainable environment and reduce the need for compensatory mitigation. In these instances where such on-site design efforts are insufficient and a significant habitat impact occurs, additional off-site mitigation features will be added to the plans to the extent necessary to comply with the requirements of the project's biological opinion pursuant to the Endangered Species Act. These bank protection measures are generic conceptual designs that include setback levees, rock slope protection with no vegetation, adjacent levees, vegetated benches, and then rock slope protection with vegetation. Those are the bank protection measures that are evaluated. Next slide, please. There are essentially five programmatic action alternative proposed, which range from low maintenance to major habitat replacement. These are the alternatives listed in this slide. There are 6 of them. The first one is the no action alternative, and then there are 5 additional ones that were evaluated. Alternative 4, employed over the past decade, the habitat replacement, which primarily focuses on creating benches revegetated, these benches revegetated with native riparian plants. Alternative 4A is believed to provide the best indication of the type and magnitude of the environmental effects most likely to result from implementation of the programmatic bank protection. So this is the preferred alternative to meet the project purpose and objectives. Next slide, please. The CEQA process determined that a number of resource areas will suffer less than significant effects from the proposed work. These include flood control and water quality, groundwater resources, transportation, climate change, air quality, recreation, vegetation, wetlands, fisheries and wildlife, and public utilities and services. Again, these are the resource areas that will suffer less than significant effects from the proposed work. Next slide. So obviously the next step is to evaluate the significant and unavoidable effects, which essentially means that the implementation of mitigation measures will reduce effects, but not to a less than significant level. These resource areas include noise and vibration, air quality and climate change, plants and wildlife, recreation, land use, aesthetics, and cultural resources. Next slide, please. The following slides describe in detail the specific, significant, and unavoidable effects. I'll list the specific headings, and if there is, rather than digging into these specific details, we can revisit them if there are specific questions or discussion needed on the individual effects, but I'll list the main areas that those are affected. So the one effect is the air quality and climate change, with a temporary increase in construction-related emissions in excess of applicable standards. Again, these are significant and unavoidable effects. Another effect, the generation of construction emissions that may have a significant impact on the environment. A generation of operational emissions that may have a significant effect on the environment. Next slide, please. Effect, noise and vibration, exposure of sensitive receptors adjacent to the levee construction sites to temporary construction related noise, and exposure of sensitive receptors to temporary construction related vibration. So this is the noise and vibration significant and unavoidable effects. vegetation and wetlands, potential loss of special status plant populations as a result of program construction. Next slide, please. The effects on wildlife, permanent loss of riparian habitat for special status wildlife species associated with compliance with the vegetation ETL, the Army Corps of Engineers vegetation on levee ETL, and wildlife effects, potential disturbance or loss of special status wildlife species and their habits as a result of construction and O&M activities. Next slide, please. Affect land use and agriculture. Conversion of important farmland to non-agricultural uses. This is a land use change as a significant and unavoidable effect. For recreation, there are long-term reduction in quality of existing recreational opportunities within the levee corridor. Obviously, specific works projects can have on recreational facilities. Next slide, please. Aesthetics, temporary visual effects caused by construction activities substantially degrade the existing visual character or quality of the surrounding. During construction, these are temporary effects. And then substantially adversely affect a scenic vista. So construction of construction of a setback levee could alter roadway alignments and introduce a large mass that would block views of vegetation waterways, affecting vistas from all vantages. So these are the aesthetic and scenic effects of the work. Substantially damaged scenic resources, including but not limited to trees, rock outcroppings, and historic buildings along a scenic highway. Another visibility effect, create a new source of light or glare. Another effect for the visual resource area. Next slide, please. Still on the aesthetics, temporary visual effects caused by construction activities and substantially degrade the existing visual character or quality of the site and its surroundings. Similarly, substantially adversely affect a scenic vista. Next slide. Substantially damage scenic resources, including but not limited to, oops, I went the wrong way. I just want to make sure we're on the right slide here. Can you go back to the previous slide? Natural resources. Maybe back one more. Okay. Excellent. Okay, I'm sorry. Next slide, please. Perfect. There is an effect on cultural resources through the disturbance of Native American or historic period human remains, similar to construction that is going on right now with both state and federal projects on site. Tribal and cultural monitoring are always a part of the work that's done for these projects. So that's one effect that could be a significant and unavoidable effect. Next slide, please. So similar to the specific, significant, and unavoidable effects, there are a number of cumulative effects that were also evaluated in the similar resource areas to the specific, significant, and unavoidable effects. And these areas include geomorphology, transportation, air quality and climate change, vegetation, wetlands, fisheries and wildlife, land use and agriculture, aesthetics, and cultural resources. And so that evaluation was made similar to the previous resource areas, but on a cumulative effect. Next slide, please. So the CEQA process provides a statement of overriding considerations as required by state CEQA guidelines. CVFPB Central Valley Flood Protection Board finds that the unavoidable significant effects are outweighed by the public safety improvements and environmental benefits offered by the selected program repair alternative. The CEQA analysis supports the board's determination that the implementation of the program is necessary to ensure the continued integrity of the Sacramento River Flood Control Project levees while protecting environmental resources and compensating for effects on significant environmental resources. Next slide. Continuing the statement of overriding considerations, implementation of the program, the Sac Bank Phase 2 80,000 linear feet addition will reduce risk of harm to life and property from floods and preserve, restore, and enhance wildlife habitat, recreation, and navigation within the program area. Slide, please. So the recommendations of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the California Department of Water Resources are that the board adopt Resolution 2020-04 in substantially the form provided, which certifies the final EIR-EIS for the Sacramento Riverbank Protection Project Phase 2 Supplemental Authorization. That's the 80,000 linear feet. Adopts the Mitigation, Monitoring, and Reporting Program, the Finding of Facts, and the Statement of Overriding Considerations that I just read. Approves the PACR, the Post-Authorization Change Report for the Sacramento Riverbank Protection Project, and delegates the executive officer the authority to execute the Notice of Determination. Next slide. So at this point, I would like to make myself available. We also have a few other folks online who might be able to help, and of course, Kim Carcel with the Army Corps of Engineers to answer any questions or provide any discussion that we might be looking for on this item.
Okay, questions from the board?
Yes, Mr. President.
Tim?
I think it's Brian.
Oh, Brian, I'm sorry.
Unless Tim was also talking. So thank you for the presentation, Brian Johnson here. I'm wondering if the two of you can describe a little bit more the process for site selection and selection of treatments at different sites. I see in the materials there's a discussion of an interagency working group and some process, and I wonder if you can elaborate a little bit on how decisions are made at different sites about what actually happens there going forward.
This is Dave Wielden. I can speak to that. It might be more appropriate for Kim to address that, but I'm available if you want, Kim.
Yeah, I can start, and I might have to call on some of my staff members, or Dave, if you have something to add, that would be fine too. I do think, I ran through that a little bit in my, let's see which slide it was. Yeah, slide number 6. We'll definitely go out every year and look at the sites and determine where there are critical sites and rank them, I believe, on a worst first basis. We will, then do our homework on which of those needs what kind of treatment, and I think it's going to vary depending on what the site is and the type of erosion. For the most part, I think the 4A alternative that Dave mentioned is probably what we would implement in most cases. But I do think that there's an option to do other kinds of bank protection measures. Yeah, we will definitely continue to work with you as the non-federal sponsor moving forward. I don't personally have any information about the working group, and I don't know, Dave, if that's something that you can address a little bit, or if maybe Dan Artho on the phone can speak to that. He has been involved in this project for a long time. So Dave or Dan.
Yeah,
this
is Dan Arthur. Dave, if you want to take it, go ahead. I can fill in, but yeah, I can provide some more detail on it.
Sure. We have done entered into coordination groups like that for different repair programs. I'm not specifically familiar with any that have been applied to the SAC Bank program, so that's not something I'm really familiar with at this time, and have any information on how it's been applied to SAC Bank. So
yeah, so I'll be happy to kind of provide a little bit more detail. As part of our past biological opinions and consultations with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service, we had agreed to establish an interagency working group primarily that engaged the resource agencies, Fish and Wildlife, NIMS, and Cal Department of Fish and Wildlife in our evaluation and assessment of project sites and recommended repairs. So that's been ongoing. It's an established working group that we've had for I'd say about 10 years or so, and that will continue. The site selection process that Kim alluded to will incorporate that, so that there are considerations brought in, not just from an engineering standpoint and a real estate perspective and an economic standpoint, but also from the environmental perspective, ways that we can avoid and minimize to the extent practicable implementing repairs without running into potentially jeopardy concerns from, in particular, listed species. So that's kind of an overview of how the site selection process will go. Kim alluded to an annual inventory that's carried out. It's a continuation of what we have been doing. That basically we have engineers and different disciplines that float the river and the entire system, identifying erosion sites, either existing ones or new ones that might have occurred from the preceding water year or flood year, and based on engineering, real estate, economic concerns or considerations, we rank them. Life safety and imminent failure of the system being kind of the highest priority, but then going down from there. So that's kind of how the site assessment and implementation process is carried out, and this kind of formalizes things a little bit more, I think, but it's more or less what we have been doing over the years in the past with our existing authorities. Does that help?
It helps some. I'm as a new board member, I'm catching up, but thank you for your answer.
Any other questions from the board?
Mr. President, Tim Ramirez.
Okay, Tim.
Thanks, Bill. I have a few. So as a reminder for all of us, we're the lead agency for CEQA. And there are a lot of significant unavoidable impacts that were just described at the programmatic level. There were a lot of comment letters that came in from the resource agencies that I skimmed, and some of the NGOs. And this question might be for DWR since they gave the presentation, but I'm wondering what, to start, our staff's relationship has been with you guys during this process, since the burden of certification falls on the board.
For SAC Bank, this is Dave Wielden, Department of Water Resources. For SAC Bank, as shown in the timeline of the public review and then this final review, the span of about 5 years, we haven't had, during that time, a lot of need to coordinate with the board and board staff on this specific item. Other parts of the program where we're initiating the actual repairs and going through the process where the state takes responsibility for the LYRPs, obtaining the LYRPs, the real estate and all the other rights for construction. We do coordinate well with the board on those issues too. This specific program, though, it's kind of a long time in between these major events, and the repairs have been, 1 or 2 sites a year. So there isn't a lot of need for a lot of coordination, but to this point, I feel like it's been effectively working.
Okay. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I would just say from my perspective, especially as being a member of the board, I was hoping for a different response. I think it does beg a lot of communication, and not just at the end, but throughout. We're the people that have to take the responsibility for making the decision to certify the document. And it's always better for us to hear from our staff that they've been involved from the get-go, which often we do. Usually that's the case. There's a lot of involvement and work being done from the beginning. The timeline is something also worth mentioning. I'm glad you brought that up. We had this discussion last month a little bit about, to some extent, this sneaking up on us and us not being very aware of the status of things. And, 2007 was the same time the state revamped the board and created the direction that we're going now with the plan and the board being a little bit more of an independent entity for things that it has direct responsibility for. And I'm having a struggle with this one because as much as you guys have worked very hard, and this has nothing to do with the hard work being done for many years by you, Dave, and Kim and the staff at the Corps, this feels like us trying to justify a program that was authorized a long time ago and spend money that Congress authorized in a way that we think makes sense as best as we can tell. But I'm not seeing a lot of evidence for the need, and I'm seeing a lot of concerns about the impacts of it. And process aside, which is its own story, I'm wrestling with, especially with us being responsible and the non-federal sponsor, what purpose this serves. I know a little bit about the history of the program, and we talked about that last month also. And this just feels like we're continuing to do things that we've been doing for decades. And I know that the Corps' authority is limited. We can't just universally make a change and reapply the money someplace else. And I know the process is long and slow and cumbersome to get these authorities. But just because we have it doesn't mean that we need to use it. And if we can find a way to make lemonade out of it, which it sounds like what you guys have been doing, then that's great. But I'm still not seeing it here. This feels like something that a bunch of people that don't work for the board have been doing for a long time. And now that we're at the end, it's come back to us to stamp it, and we have to take responsibility for it. And I don't think I'm in a position yet to support that. Thanks, Bill.
Mr. President, Vice President Dolan wanted to make a comment.
Jane, please.
Brian, could you make sure she's off mute, please?
This is Jane. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
But all of you are now, a bunch of beeps as well. So I want to echo some of what Board Member Ramirez had to say. I think that he and I, in different roles that we had a few years ago, have some experience with this program at local and environmental concern levels. I understand the importance of certain bank protection for lives and significant property. So I'm going to support this, but I do want to express to have an add-on authorization to a program that was established decades ago prior to the concern for destruction of ecosystem and environmental resources doesn't seem to be the best process to go forward. So I'd like some rethought on that, even though we may do it here. And I think that you, everyone who's given this presentation, thank you for the deep background. It was certainly recognize the work that you put into that to provide that information. But I think that this board, certainly this member, and perhaps a few others, want a little more information as to how the sites are selected. What occurred in the 80s and 90s caused litigation and did cause some changes in the program. But there are a significant number of outside banks, of natural banks of the Sacramento River that got rocked, that caused erosion where the rock ended, where the rock began. In some cases, that rock got bypassed by geomorphic functions of a river and the rocks in the river and not protecting anything anymore. And I'm concerned if any site selection would put rock on to protect riparian. There were some that did that. So I just think some more consciousness of how this is done, and it really be repairs of existing rocks that protect significant areas of population, and not doing it in an area because someone thinks it's time to do it. That's my historical context, and I'll support this, but I hope it changes in the future.
This is Dave Wilden. I'd like to interject that the repairs done by the Sacramento Riverbank Protection Project are pretty consistent with all the other repairs that we do with other programs. The flood system repair program, where we provide funding to local agencies to implement the repairs. The storm damage emergency rehabilitation program that we're undertaking right now with current construction. These all programs focus on protecting riverbanks in the most efficient and effective way possible. And they all follow the proper guidelines and environmental processes and reviews. So this isn't, the SAC Bank program doesn't differ significantly in terms of its repair types and process of developing those repairs than the other programs that are currently in place and being progressed.
This is Jane. Understood, and thank you for that. I'm glad that's in the record now.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a comment, Bill.
Oh, yeah, Joe.
Working on this project as a designer, as an opponent, as a proponent for 40 years, I just have to say that this is a remnant of the fact of the basic design concept of the Sacramento River flood protection project that conceived of having levees close together along the river and putting flows in the bypasses during big floods. In many ways, it was visionary in that it was a way of keeping sediment from the hydraulic mining moving downstream and so forth. But the missing piece was that those levees close together create higher velocities, and higher velocities create erosion. And so here we are. I mean, this is a project that I hope is going to continue, because I think it's extremely difficult to operate and maintain the levee system that we have if we don't have federal support in doing bank protection. And this was recognized a long time ago by the Corps, as early as the 1930s, that this design, I won't necessarily call it a flaw, but the design concept was leading to so much erosion. And in the 1950s, the Corps and the Reclamation Board at that time had a big fight about accepting the project as complete because the state felt that these erosion conditions were ongoing and didn't want to accept the project. And basically the Corps said, you do it or else. And we had to accept this flawed program. And I understand the concerns that many have, including myself, where I've gone out and seen stretches of rock that have been bypassed out in the middle of nowhere at this point in time. I'm certainly not an advocate for that, but we have to, if we're going to successfully operate and maintain the Sacramento River Flood Control Project, we need the Sac Bank Protection Project to help us.
Hey, Bill.
Yes.
Just one more thing. Thanks, Joe, for reminding us about that history, which I think is important. And I agree with the things you just said. The thing I wanted to make sure I pointed out and that I'm struggling with is that the responsibility for the program is ours, the board's. And the work that's been done isn't going to lead to anything being done on the ground. This is a programmatic document to check a box for things that need to be done at the project level. We have no permits, we have no secret coverage to actually do any of the work. And one of the things I'd like to see done differently in the same way that Joe just described and Jane is the way that we participate in that discussion. Both the design and the concerns and the details about site selection, but also about the environmental process. So I wanted to put those flags up.
Sorry, this is Dan Artho. I appreciate the explanation that Joe Countryman just provided, and also your concerns, Board Member Ramirez. I think there's a misconception here that the Central Valley Flood Protection Board doesn't have representation on the Sac Bank program, but I think it's very well represented, and I believe we have several staff members that regularly attend our IWG meetings as well as our Sac Bank planning meetings and design meetings. So I think I'm struggling to see where we're not having sufficient participation from the board, and maybe what we need to do is be able to kind of clarify that a little bit more for you all. But unfortunately, probably the best person from the Corps' perspective that could have provided a lot more insight and detail on that is the standing project manager, which is Steve Osgood. Unfortunately, he's not available today, but we do have regular representation from environmental staff, from DWR, who are standing in for CVFPB board members, board representation. So I'm not sure. I think there's a misconception that there's not sufficient representation on what we've been doing to date, as well as what's being proposed in the future.
Dan, I think one of the issues here is, the staff is available for those meetings and so on. They're proceeding in terms of the process that has occurred before and traditionally has occurred and so on. But what Tim and others, Brian and perhaps Jane Dolan are concerned with is that the board members themselves need to be more involved early on with these projects or specifics of what's going to occur, because there's a sense that the board, although they want to go along with what traditionally has been going on, there are some changes that the board, from a policy standpoint, believe should be inserted early on so that they could be considered in the design, the site selection, and so on of these individual projects as they move along. So as a suggestion in response to what you just said, perhaps David, Michael, Michael Wright and Leslie can develop a progress report schedule to the board on this particular program as we go along, so that Dave Wielden can give us more information on what specifics they're thinking about and want to go ahead with, and that the representatives of the Corps, of course, be participating also. But I think the board themselves, from a policy perspective, would like to be involved earlier on and in the specifics of this particular program.
Bill, that's true, and I appreciate that, but my bigger concern is the staff. And with all due respect, state staff are not the same as board staff. So somebody under Leslie's umbrella and Michael's umbrella and Andrew's umbrella needs to be more of a part of this process. Without going into the details here, we all got the details Wednesday night. It's Friday morning. We asked for this last month, and we got it, 48 hours before we're supposed to make a decision. And, I'm happy to talk about this offline, but it's not just the board members, it's the staff. If it's really our program and we're the non-federal sponsor, it needs to run like that, and it doesn't. And we made that clear last month, and I'm trying to make that point now. And it's not to discount the hard work being done by the people on the program, federal and state staff. But we're trying to turn this into a 21st century program, and there's a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Tim.
Mr. President.
Anybody?
Yeah.
Mr. President, Board Member Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Comment first, just to agree with that discussion, and at least two more questions. The first one is actually a question to my fellow board members and Leslie, to you, from your perspective as staff, and it's a particular version of what we've been talking about here. The EIR that we're being asked to certify here today says that the Corps and this board have identified alternative 4A as the preferred alternative. And it goes on to describe why we did that. And there's similar language about site selection and treatments and mitigation measures and so on. And if we vote to certify it today, that will not be a lie. We will have selected that as the preferred alternative. But I'm wondering, for those of you who have been here for a while, the extent to which you feel like that statement is true in a broader sense, and that the board did engage in the selection of that alternative, and the framing of the alternative and the responses to comments and the design of the program. And that's not just a rhetorical question. I wasn't here, and I don't know the answer to that. I see there were workshops at the beginning and then some other stuff, and I watched the tape from last month. I would have liked to have been here. So I'm genuinely interested in knowing the answer to that question.
Leslie, you want to take that on?
I think it was actually directed to other board members initially, but I can certainly tell you from the staff perspective, that was not the case. But this is the result of the agreement from 2008 that essentially puts the department in the board's shoes for purposes of certain programs. So I think from the Corps' perspective, when they say they're dealing with the state or dealing with the board, they don't distinguish which agency those folks that they're talking to are reporting back to. So I think what you've identified are one of the limits of that relationship as it stands now. This is one of the results of how that's limited in certain ways. So pursuant to that delegation of project management authority, you could say, yes, that staff is your staff, but you don't have any direct control over that staff since they work for another agency.
This is Jane. Can I be heard?
Yes.
I hear you.
Okay. Board Member Johnson, I think your question's on point and speaks to and welcoming you to this effort of the board that came into being 2011, 2012, that we are trying to distinguish at the point that the board means board members and not anyone who's in the organization. But our executive officer is correct that as long as an agreement exists that things are done on our behalf, we are in this very awkward position of receiving a pretty significant time-sensitive request to approve something for which we have not been involved from its inception. So I believe the way we are organizing our own staff, that message is clearly there and will be involved. And this is, as Mr. Countryman says, sort of a legacy program out there that still needs some changes, but still has some benefits. So the answer is no, we weren't involved to this point as board members, but the other answer is bureaucratically, organization-wide, agreement-wide, the board was involved. It's awkward and we still want to improve it.
Okay, other members? Oh, Brian, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm not trying to put people on the spot, but I'm interested in that question. And I get that, references to, agencies, and this board's response are entitled to and need to and should rely on staff. And but calling attention to the fact that the thing that we're stating is that we did this thing. For example, identifying that alternative and choosing it for the following reasons. So if other board members want to comment on that, that's fine, but I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'll give you 5 seconds and then I'll ask my other question. Okay. So my other question is, I did my best to read through this whole packet on short notice. So but I'm curious whether there's an assessment that exists that evaluates whether and to what extent this program advances or doesn't advance the flood plan.
Who is that directed to, though?
Anybody who might know the answer?
We have a system of levees and channels that are subject to erosion attack. And a basic premise of the flood plan is that system is intact. If it fails because of erosion, then it's not intact. So to that extent, the bank protection project is an inherent part of the state plan of flood protection because it's assuming that the flood protection exists.
One of the main priorities of the flood plan, Brian, is when you read the plan, you'll see that there's a priority for ongoing operation and maintenance, which the plan details is not, the system itself has not been properly maintained or operated in the past. And mainly because of the lack of resources, and it quantifies the gap there as between spending now about $30 million a year when we should be spending 130 million a year. So that it's obvious that the plan details the lack of operation and maintenance in the program. And one of the priorities that the board has been doing through its attempts to develop a more robust enforcement program and seeking compliance with the PL 8499 standard criteria, maintenance standard. The board has maintained a substantial priority for that. This program, this bank protection program, is a program that has a legacy of supporting that operation and maintenance. It probably should be changed, and the board should be much more involved in the goals and responsibilities, which it isn't at this point. But the fact of the matter is, a source of money and effort is certainly needed to do this, which is, clearly outlined in the plan. I think that is, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, and Joe, I mean, I take your point, and it's good to be, brought back to first principles. But certainly we need to maintain the system and provide for public safety. The premise behind the flood plan and behind the evaluation for this program is that there may be multiple ways to do it, and that there are choices that go into how we want to be doing that. And my interest is in understanding how, as a board member, I can go about ensuring that various state programs that all have, the same, some of the same top level goals or others are not working at cross purposes and are adding up to accomplishing the the mandate that we've set for ourselves with the program. And if there were only one way to do it, we wouldn't need to do all of this work. And so you and I can go offline and talk about how to make that work. I'm not sure that we disagree with each other on that idea. And that's what I was getting at.
I'm not expressing disagreement at all. I'm just trying to respond.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Mr. President, Board Member Griego.
Okay, Mary Jane.
You're on mute. There you go.
Okay. So it sounds to me like there needs to be some change in the process of how they look at this, these types of this river, Sacramento River Bank Protection Program. And I'm all for it as far as that goes, looking at it. But I also want to underscore what Joe had said, because Yuba County is a perfect example of a lack of attention to the riverbanks. I mean, we had 2 levee failures in 11 years because of erosion issues and under seepage issues on the Yuba and on the Feather, which, the history of that has created chaos for decades for Yuba County. What we did at Three Rivers was we actually set back a 6-mile stretch of that Feather River levee in order to keep the river from eroding that levee bank. And at the same time, we also reduced the flood elevation, not only for our side of the river, but also for Yuba City side. So I think this program is really important for identifying weak spots of erosion that the river has caused, especially in high water times when that water runs high. It really attacks those levees in particular places, and eventually it erodes it out.
Okay, any more responses at this point?
This is Dave Wielden. I'd like to add a few other items. One regarding the importance of this program. This is a 100% non or 100% state and federally funded program. There is no cost to the locals to implement these repairs. So with a small investment by the state for the LYRPs and program support, we're getting a big return on our dollars for these repairs. And I'd also like to say that to say that we haven't been coordinating with the board staff, I'm not sure is completely correct. In April of 2019, we assisted the board with sending a letter out to the Army Corps of Engineers indicating their support, the board's support for the Sacramento Bank Protection Project Phase 2 80,000 lineal feet post-authorization change report. We've also brought this issue up with board staff and determined with them that because there's an existing agreement with the department to do this work and that we're currently providing the funding for it, that there wasn't a lot of interest in them taking over these types of responsibilities. So I just want to, say that I'm not going to say the coordination has been great, but I feel like it hasn't been characterized correctly today.
Okay, anybody else?
President Edgar, this is Kim Carcel from the Army Corps of Engineers. I just wanted something I should have said at the beginning of my presentation. And just a reminder, since there are some new board members, you might not know that we have received the last of the federal funding for the 405 linear feet of bank protection. So that is wrapping up, and without approval of this 80,000 linear feet packer, I think that the Army Corps of Engineers is, there's no additional way for us to provide federal support at this time. And again, I think I mentioned this is kind of unique for what we do. Typically, we would turn a project over, and this would be full O&M for the non-federal sponsor. So this is a unique opportunity for us to really continue to work with you in providing this vital bank protection within the Sacramento River area. Over.
Thank you, Kim. Anybody else? Okay, let's bring this matter to a close. What's the pleasure of the board?
This is Jane. I would move adoption of the 6 actions that the staff recommends, and that's iterated in the staff memo. I don't feel the need to read them.
Okay, you're essentially moving that the staff report be approved and the staff recommendations.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
I'll second that.
Okay, Mary Jane seconds. Okay, Ryan, let's have a roll call vote on this, please.
Board Member Griego?
Yes.
Board Member Johnson?
Aye.
Board Member Ramirez?
No.
Board Member Valines?
Aye.
Board Member Countryman?
Aye.
Vice President Dolan?
Yes.
President Edgar?
Aye. So there are 6 ayes, 1 no on that vote, split vote. The motion is passed. Okay, thank you for that. That was good discussion. Good to move on. We're on item 10. Members, you have these reports in your packet for today's meeting, the update on the board administration, the update on the activities of the operations branch, the plan implementation branch, and the update on the activities of the environmental services branch. And the executive officer's report was submitted to you with the packet. Are there any other additional comments you want to make at this time, Leslie?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to highlight one thing from the administration report that you received yesterday. The reason you received it yesterday is because I wanted to add the item from the Delta Stewardship Council. That was the presentation on the plan update from Mary Jimenez and Ruth Darling of our staff. And just to point out to especially our newer board members, but certainly for all of you, that's the example of collaboration and coordination. Doing that presentation together was greatly appreciated by the Stewardship Council. And pointedly, one of the council members asked Ruth about the MOU discussions and how that group is going. And just for our two new board members, that is a separate MOU that was signed 3 years ago, and it's no mystery that I kind of had to very reluctantly be dragged into that agreement because I didn't think that it was going to do anything to further the board's mission. But I am happy to report that that's not the case. And after several years of hard work, and particularly on our staff, Jeet Dua, more recently Darren Suin and James Hirota, we have been able to make some significant progress on that. So being able to report to the council and have them appreciate that and laud our staff for their collaboration, and then some of the progress that you'll be hearing about that's being made on that other MOU that will be coming up shortly. Just to highlight that for you, I do have hope that that we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Leslie. Any comments from the board?
This is Joe. I would just let Leslie know that Susan Trayton reached out to me after the coordinating committee meeting because I made a comment that I didn't want to take up all the time asking questions about their presentation on climate change that they're doing for their study, and offered to meet and provide additional time and for me to thoroughly ask questions and get responses. So just to let you know that.
Okay, any other questions?
I have one quick comment, Bill.
Yeah.
I just wanted to recognize and thank, maybe Les can pass this on, for Sarah and John and their assignment for contact tracing. Thanks for keeping us updated about that, and thanks to both of them for volunteering to help and be part of that response.
Thank you for mentioning that. I was going to highlight that as well. We had to send 5% of our staff to do that. For us, that was 2 positions, and I know that a lot of folks had a hard time in other agencies getting people to volunteer, but we had volunteers right from the beginning who recognized and wanted to help. And that's Sarah and John. So they're fully deployed in LA. That doesn't mean they're down in LA. They're all working from home, of course, but working on doing the contact tracing for the county that's most affected by this now in the state. And I think you hopefully received the governor's press release, his PowerPoint that went along with his press conference this week that had some graphics on that. They're trying to put some more visual around the messaging on how to reduce the spread. So thank you for that.
Mr. President.
Oh, excuse me. Jane, was that you?
Yes.
Okay.
I guess this is a message for staff. I really appreciate these reports and the plan implementation and compliance branch. I know put a lot of effort into providing details, and I'm one who likes maps, so thanks for including that. When you say things, I'm always looking it up, so thank you for saving me from that and providing it. The fact that we don't take up a lot of time talking about it at the board doesn't mean that we're not reading, understanding, and appreciating, and knowing that in between times we can have those discussions with you. So thanks for your efforts.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Anything else from the members? Okay, members, we're on item 11, which are board member comments and specific committee updates. Are there any of those? issues that anybody wants to talk about?
This is Jane again. Perhaps Brian didn't speak first, but the advisory committee had another very good and robust meeting, in my opinion. Our second one on the online platform, so it's kind of interesting. We have between 60 and 80 people who log into that, and not all of them talk, but they're all very involved. The committee has now formed with volunteers 3 subgroups to meet during the next few weeks to delve into providing recommendations rather than how they want things, rather than just overall, hey, make it better. And so we would hope to see fruition of some of that at the September meeting. And the next actual meeting of the full advisory committee has been set for September 17th. So we give some time for subgroups to work on their projects.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Anybody else? Okay, we're on item 12, upcoming meetings and topics for the board. NASPA has scheduled their meetings August 10th through 13th. Leslie, you're on the board of that. Is there anything you want to add about that?
Just to mention that, like so many other things, the meeting's gone virtual. So the agenda is posted at the NASMA website, and it was going to be in Park City, Utah. I was really looking forward to going there, but things being what they are these days, it's going to be all virtual, so anyone can participate if any of the board members have interest in the topics and would like to register. It's not too late to do that. So similar to FMA, which is going to be virtual as well, just please let me know or let Catherine know, and we can get you registered for either or both of those conferences coming up. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. We have a board workshop on the 14th, and that's going to be more specifics on the SSJD or
Mr. President, because of a request from the SAFECA folks to also set up a tour, which may or may not be a board tour, it might have to be small groupings. We haven't worked out the details yet, so it may be a tour, it may be a traditional workshop. Please bear with us as we finalize some of that. But it is going to be, if it is a workshop, the topic will be, as Kim Floyd mentioned at the coordinating committee, the update on the SSJDD feasibility study. If it's a tour, it's going to be focused on the Yola bypass. So please kind of keep both of those still in mind. If you can make it out here on that day, we're still trying to arrange that.
Okay, thanks, Les. Coordinating committee on August 26th. We had as Joe alluded to, a fairly robust meeting with the coordinating committee the other day. A lot of interesting studies and so on that we'll be following up with. And then our regular board meeting on August 28th. So that's the calendar. Anything else on that, Les? Anything coming up that you want to?
I mentioned FMA, it's not listed on here, but for our new board members, that takes place the Tuesday through Friday, the week after Labor Day. That's also going virtual, and it was supposed to be in Sacramento, but it's all online now. So if you wanted to register for that, it's not on here, but we can certainly send Board Member Griego the info on that as well. I think Board Member Johnson has it already.
Okay. Members were on item 11 or 13, our closed session. Leslie, I talked to Jeet about kind of meeting or talking to the 2 new board members regarding some of the background information and some of the case work that we're looking at. Not necessary that we have a closed session yet because there isn't a lot of action, but they would probably need some background on what we're considering, what the background of some of the issues are, and so on. So I suggested to Jeet that he talk separately to Mary Jane and to Brian to just give them some background and an update on the current issues that we have, and then so that when we do have a closed session for some items with action or just status reports, they'll be up to speed and be willing to willing to go on those legal matters. So we don't have a closed session today, and therefore item 14, we don't have a report out of the closed session. So we're on item 15, which is adjournment. And without objection, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye, Mike.
See you later, Michael.
Bye, you guys.
You too, Mike. Take care.